Mr. Sandman, bring me a dream. Make him the cutest that I've ever seen. Give him two lips like roses and clover, and tell him that his lonesome nights are over. Sandman, I'm so alone, don't have nobody to call my own. Please turn on your magic beam. Mr. Sandman, bring me a dream.
Good evening and welcome to Nox Mente. Tonight's guest is Wren Collier. Wren is an avid scholar of the paranormal, having been obsessed from an early age with the anomalous and the occult. Originally from the deep American South, he currently lives in Minneapolis, Minnesota, where he toils endlessly at honing his craft. Wren is also working on his book focused on the intersection of the occult and ufology. Wren, welcome to Nox Mente.
Welcome,
hey,
Wren.
Hi, everyone.
I guess I didn't realize that you lived in Minnesota until this moment.
Yeah, I moved here a couple of years ago. I lived here briefly before while my girlfriend was in grad school up here.
Mm-hmm.
Moved back to Atlanta, lived there for a little while, and decided that we wanted to come back up here. So.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, those are both places that I have family. Atlanta and Minneapolis. Well, Minnesota.
Yeah, I grew up in Alabama, and you know, when I was a kid, Atlanta was always the big city for me because it was like 2 hours away. It's where I always go to shows and stuff. And when I got older, I was like, oh, you know, I'm going to try living there. And actually living there when you're an adult versus like visiting there when you're like a stupid teenager is a whole lot different in terms of experience. So.
Oh yeah, I can say all the places I've lived, which has been like over 100 places now, 100 moves. I've never had any Alabama experiences.
Oh, wow. You should go to Alabama sometime. I mean,
I've been through it, and I do think it's actually beautiful. I've just never had any experiences there.
Yeah, it's a geographically beautiful state. It's also extremely poor and has a lot of problems right now. But
I hear it's got a lot of lakes.
It does have a lot of lakes. I grew up near Logan Martin Lake down there, where people even have houseboats and stuff. And like,
so did you have a lot of nature time as a child?
Yeah, on the weekend, often we'd go up to Mount Cheaha and like Talladega National Forest. And I remember sort of like every weekend my dad would want to go up there and go hiking, or there's a place up there called Bald Rock that's sort of like this huge sort of natural like granite lime cliff that like across.
I do love those like kind of lookouts. There's in Tennessee, there's Lookout Mountain, as you probably know, where you can see several states. It's so
Allegedly.
There's something about
allegedly.
Right, allegedly. I've never been able to make the boundaries out, but I love the cave there. But it's still, there's something about the altitude and just looking so far off and seeing so much that there's something mesmerizing about that.
Yeah, definitely. I don't get much of that. So very flat.
Oh,
where I am,
well, I love so many people in Minnesota. I absolutely detest Minnesota. I feel like I get stuck when I'm there. It's like how I feel about Iowa, and I love Iowans, but I don't want to be there.
This is my second or third winter here, and I thought I was going to be able to like handle it better. I think every year I'm handling it a little better.
Yeah.
I'm at the point this year that I'm like,
I don't miss that up there. It's charming at first. It's so beautiful, and if they were just shorter, it would be great. It's just they're so long.
Yeah,
so this kind of all plays into how we open. Tell us about the world you grew up in as a young Wren. And I mean your earliest memories of things that influenced you. And so we already have kind of an idea of where you were, and that there was nature involved and all that. What things influenced you on TV, dreams you may have had early on?
I think one of my earliest and most terrifying like memories that led to a lot of dreams and stuff were my parents taking me to see Ghostbusters 2 when I was apparently a baby. I was really young. And the only thing I remember is the scene where the little baby Oscar is walking across the ledge outside because Annie Potts and Rick Moranis are too busy making out to notice that he's climbed out onto the ledge. And this like ghostly nanny like sort of flies in from the New York City skyline and like reaches out this like supernaturally long hand and like grabs him and takes him away. And I remember being in a theater and like seeing that, and it's odd because like I must have been like literally a baby, but it's still like my earliest memory. And I think for years, I used to sit like my living room at my parents' house was like off to your right. There was like a long hallway that all the bedrooms were down, and the living room is where the TV was. So, you know, spent a lot of time like sitting in front of the TV watching like Star Trek and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I would always get this like feeling that something was watching me from down the hallway, and I would always expect to turn and look to my right down the hallway and see that same like ghostly woman like staring at me. I never did, but I always expected it. I think
other than your mom, right?
Yeah, other than my mom. I think I carried that even into like almost like teenage years. I was a very weird, like magically minded child. Like, I don't know where I got this idea, but one of my first like sort of things, magical thinking I remember is when I was like really young, like elementary school age, probably like 3rd or 4th grade, I believed that I could control the wind. Like I would stand out in my backyard and I would like say, okay, now go left. And the wind would like go left. And I would say, go right. And the wind would go right. And it was like, I gave no justification for it at all, other than like, yeah, of course I can control the wind. And I would believe things like if I ran through a rainstorm, if I ran at like just the right speed and just the right like sort of hops, I could like avoid getting wet. Like I could avoid every single raindrop. And I don't know why I thought like this.
That's actually fantastic. And would you convey these things to like say your parents? Did you get it's like with children in what they call their imagination, I suppose. Mm-hmm. Was it reinforced, or did it, what was the feedback?
It wasn't really reinforced. It was more kind of like, I would try to tell them these things and they'd be like, yeah, okay, that's cute. Like, they didn't really give it too much thought. Although with the wind thing, I did convince that like this girl who was a neighbor of mine and my little brother, that they could also control the wind. And like, we would all stand outside and do it together.
Oh, now see, here's where the power happens. We start getting agreement with others. Mm-hmm. Right?
Yeah.
What sign are you in?
I'm a Pisces.
Okay. So when you were doing this with your 2 other friends, was it working the same way?
I mean, in my head it was. I really don't know if I was actually controlling the wind, but it seemed to agree with me most of the time.
Well, there's a thing called really cloud busting.
If it's in your head, right?
I had some tea there. Thank you. It's part of, this is like a neural pathway that's fantastic. So you're open, you're already believing in yourself, and you're bringing others into it. Yeah, and knowing where you are now, that's great. It seems like so par for the course.
Yeah, in some ways, it sort of scared me later in life because as I grew up into my teenage years and into my early adulthood, I had a lot of experiences like that where sometimes myself and other people were kind of like deep into some occult or paranormal type stuff. And sometimes I wondered if I was maybe convincing other people that it was happening. And, maybe it wasn't really happening. Maybe it was something that I was just imagining. And I began to grow really worried that I was like convincing other people that these things were real. And then they became so real to them that it was like affecting them.
Yes. Well, that's a nice way to kind of have a sense of security or control. Also, you know, there's like, it's like a stopgate in a weird way, psychologically speaking.
Mhm.
Did you, so were you brought up with any kind of religious stuff?
Very loose. I mean, neither one of my parents regularly attended church or anything. Like sometimes on Easter we would go to like a service, or and I had this brief little period. So neither one of my parents were really very religious. I think my dad had a lot of problems with the church. He was like brought up in a, like a Baptist environment, and he couldn't really stand this kind of brimfire and hellstone,
Mm-hmm.
hellfire and brimstone approach. And so he never wanted to go. My mom a little more was like a Church of Christ person, and so when I was first introduced to like the occult, I think I was maybe 11 or 12, and I had an
Mm-hmm.
older friend who was into like Wicca and had some like books and ceremonial magic and stuff, and he would like teach me stuff and like loan me books. And when my dad found out about it, he was like oddly upset about it, even though he wasn't
Oh.
religious. He like didn't, I
Was
guess
it still like devilly to him?
yeah, I think so. Although in his defense, I think maybe he was more worried about what other people would think more than he cared himself. You know,
Yeah, yes.
like maybe he felt like he was looking out for me because, you know, I was growing up in a very conservative religious place. Even though, you know, my sort of orbit around my day-to-day life wasn't religious.
Yeah.
And you know, I took it badly, so I said, okay, well, you know, if you want me to be a Christian, then I'll be a Christian. And so I started to go to church regularly on Sundays. I would go to like Sunday school, and I was like, okay, yeah, people teach me about the Bible. And I was going to a Church of Christ, and
How old were you at this point when you decided I'll do this for my dad?
it was around the same age. I think I was just getting into like seventh grade. It was like
Okay.
right around going into high school.
Okay.
And I would go, and like I was going to the Church of Christ, which is sort of a weird, they have sort of their own little weird things. And that was what I found out while I was going there. Because while I was going to Sunday school to be like, okay, well, teach me about Christ, teach me about the Bible, because I didn't know anything about it. And all they taught me were all the reasons why the Church of Christ does everything right, and Baptists do this wrong, and these other, like in the Church of Christ, they don't use instruments in their music devotionals. They just use their voices, and they're very proud of this and tell people this all the time. And that lasted for maybe like 6 weeks for me, because I was like, I'm not actually learning anything about like the faith, you know, I'm just learning a bunch of like junk. And I was like, you know what, I can just read the Bible myself if I
Yeah.
really feel like it. And that was
Which
the end
is
of that.
a rather juicy read, by the way.
Yeah, I mean, I would just like, I would pretend like I would start to read the Bible, but then I would just immediately skip over to Revelations and then read.
Right. Well, I wanted to say this earlier. The brimstone and fire stuff's the best part. It's the best bit.
Yeah, really.
I am the most fascinated by all that judgment, and yeah, that's the good stuff.
There was an interesting thing that we would I don't know if they have these in other places of the country, but in like the Deep South during Halloween, a lot of churches run these like things called hell houses, where like you go and it's like a morality play, like some bad teenagers get drunk and die in a car accident, and like you follow them through hell.
Oh, I've never heard of this.
And then like, you know,
scared straight.
Yeah,
Right.
it's kind of like that. Like they initially go to heaven, and then Jesus rejects them, and then they go to hell, and you like follow them through hell. And
oh, it's so my labs.
It's trauma-based mind control. What it is.
Right, totally is.
I would get dragged out to these, but I was probably the only person who was like, "Wow, hell is fucking cool."
Right. Well, it's
Like,
got all the good colors and
yeah,
the sexy babes, and you know.
Exactly. It's like hell is way cooler, and
Yeah.
I mean, that's probably not what I was supposed to get out of that, but
yeah, I always got, I didn't get any of this, but when I'm still interested in all of it. I love it. But it did always sound like, wow, this seems more like a place of freedom like a freedom of will, so I can kind of do what I want, get around. And then as I came into occult stuff later, I started to parse all this out. But as a young person, I was mystified by that dichotomy between such control and then such freedom, and these two aspects of Christianity.
Yeah, and in the literature too, hell is pretty thoroughly described, whether it's in the Inferno or in other texts, while heaven is always left nebulous. So it's like, if you're really interested in like, the other world, the material you're going to read about it is going to be about hell. And I always found, it to be fascinating. Like, I read the Inferno in high school on, just on my own, and just everything about it always fascinated me. I mean, like, sort of like death in general, like, fascinated me, or sort of had a fixation for me when I was a little kid.
Yeah, same here.
When I was pretty young, I had a cousin who was like 2 years old at the time, or maybe he was younger than that. He may have only been like a year old or something. And we had went to visit him at one point, and not long after that visit, he like mysteriously died in his bed.
Oh, jeez, that's terrible.
Yeah, it was like my first real experience with death, really. And it was very formative for me, because I was like, even though I was a little kid, I still thought, I remember going to the funeral, like seeing him in his casket and everything, and thinking, like, everything is tenuous. Like, if he died and he was that young, he wasn't an old person, like, then I could die too.
Yes.
And then I became like obsessed with my own death. Like, I wouldn't be able to go to sleep at night, because I would lay in bed awake, and I would think about being in like a coffin and like looking out and like seeing people like come view me at my own funeral.
Yes.
You must have loved Kill Bill.
Yeah, it was weird. Like, I mean, I couldn't go to sleep for weeks because of that. And, I eventually kind of got over it. And, I have different views about death now, so it doesn't bother me as much. But
we're definitely going to get into death. That is, I find this, so what you've just said, though, is something I find with a lot of people in Western culture that have encountered death as young people. I did too. And I went through that same kind of phase. I was terrified for a while. And I'm always struck by this similarity in concept. And also there's a certain patina that people who experience death young and are allowed to experience it. So you get to see the body in the casket, you knew the person that wasn't, and not talking grandparents, I'm talking your peers or younger, relatively young, so that it affects you in a way where I can die. They can die. It's possible now that I can die. And as a little kid, that's kind of heavy. So that is fascinating. I'm strangely not surprised to hear this, even though I didn't know this. I haven't heard you speak of this anywhere.
Yeah, I've never talked about it on other shows or anything.
Did you have any dreams of that experience of like him in the coffin, or any dreams of him after the death?
No, and that's something that is, I don't know, maybe not unique is the right word, but like, I generally don't dream about people I know, hardly ever. Every now and then I will, like particular key like figures that I've known for a long time, but in general, I don't dream about events that have happened to me or people I've known.
Okay, interesting. Are you Rh negative by chance?
I have no idea what blood type is. That's probably bad, but I have no idea.
It's not bad, because if there is an emergency, they type you so fast nowadays. In the past, that was like life or death. Okay, so here at the beginning, yes. So have you experimented with any psychedelics? And I'm not really interested in like partying stuff, but anything that actually cracked your shell.
That's a little roundabout, because yes, I've done plenty of psychedelics, mostly recreationally, but experimentally as well. Most of them kind of in a small frame of time when I was a little older. Like I think when I was 19 was when I did my first hit of acid, a guy from Oregon mailed me some.
Of course. It's always Oregon.
Yeah. And I remember the first time like I sort of did LSD, it wasn't even strong. It was like a really weak hit, but it was enough to bring back my imagination in the same fashion that it existed as when I was like a kid. Like I could convince myself that like I was somewhere else, or like I could sort of live in fantasy, you know. Then later, I became friends with a director who was sort of infamous for abusing over-the-counter like drugs like Robitussin, Dramamine, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And for a little while, I did a lot of that because A, it was legal, and,
Right.
and B, I was experimenting. Specifically, I think, and still to this day, the most vivid psychedelic, because most psychedelics I've done, you know, they make things look weird and they make your imagination go crazy, but they don't really make you see things that aren't really there.
Mm-hmm.
But I, at one point, decided to take like a super high dose of Benadryl, and the active chemical in Benadryl is like diphenhydramine hydrochloride, and it causes you to have like tangible like hallucinations. I remember when I was like coming up on it, it makes you feel physically awful. Please, nobody listen to this. Please don't do Benadryl like this. Like,
right. Yeah, we're not advocating anything.
No,
And
you
also,
please don't.
Can't anymore. They changed the formula.
yeah.
Okay, it's astoundingly dangerous. Like, please don't do this. So, like, I feel like I can't swallow. Like, my tongue's like swollen. I can barely move. But I remember looking around and seeing my friend, and then noticing that his eyes had been like replaced by molten orbs of metal.
Oh, wow.
And then I looked over at like the couch that was next to me, and just like in a horror movie, like these enormous spider legs started coming out from over like the couch, and
Oh my God.
like this enormous spider like crawled out and was like looking at me, and I could see myself reflected in its like eyes. Its eyes were like glistening, and I still remember like how vivid and like real it seemed, even though at the time like I knew that I'd taken something. I didn't like freak out about it, but I was like, when you're confronted with something like that real looking,
Mm-hmm. It almost
it's
sounds like PCP to me.
yeah, it's terrible. I mean, the physical effects are awful, but like just like the hallucinations are horrifying. But the what I meant when I said roundabout was like I had out of body experiences and sleep paralysis since I was like young,
Mm-hmm.
and so you know, like out of body experiences are more, I guess, reality shredding than any psychedelic that you can do. Maybe say like DMT or something.
I agree 100% with you on that. But a lot of people, it seems like so few people actually have out of body experiences that the closest thing to get a non-local experience is through some sort of alternate method to get there, and yet it still pales.
Yeah, exactly. And you know, like I encourage people like have some sort of non-local experience, whether it's, you know, through DMT or mescaline or an out-of-body experience. I mean, it's they're all means to an end.
Yeah.
But if you can have an out-of-body experience, that's, you know, it's free and you're not going to get in trouble for having them, and they're more vivid than any drug I've ever taken.
It's still, and then
so the astral plane's not heavily policed, like they say.
Yeah, that caught me, Jerry, with the "it's free" part.
Yeah.
So, it was like, I'm leaving that for post Horis. But write that down, Jerry. So I agree with you though. I think that it's a good thing, and we look at other cultures and these kind of ceremonies that involve some of the sacred herbs and the sacred things the earth grows. You know, psychedelics have played a big part and continue to. We should expand our consciousness and get out of the little egg we are in. It needs to be cracked. So I don't advocate, I'm not advocating anyone do it, but I also think that because of legal reasons, obviously, but I do think for me, it changed my life for the better.
Yeah, I think it does for most people as well. People always try to scare you away with, oh, what if you have a bad trip? But
I had many, and that's why I stopped. So like with anything, if it's bad, why would you do it? Why would you continue? How is let's move into, so I want to get into the paralysis and all this dream stuff. So let's start moving in there.
Okay.
Give us an idea of the general non-lucid, non-OB, paralysis type dreams. Your average dreams. Maybe even this includes your daily unpacking of events. What do they look like and sound like, etc.?
Okay. I mean, I've got sort of my poorly upkept dream diary up if you want me to read some of these for you.
Yeah, I'd love that. We don't get enough actual dreams on here, and that's my fault. That's my fault mostly. I'm always wanting to know what people are thinking. What's going on with it?
Yeah, it's interesting. Some of these I read and like I have weird little memories of them, but like some of them seem totally foreign to me. Like, this is like late 2017. I don't know if this counts as a normal dream because it was prophetic, but I had a dream of going to a theme park. Like I remember looking up and seeing a roller coaster above me, and the next day, my girlfriend suggested we go to the Mall of America, and I'd never been there, and I didn't realize there was a roller coaster in the Mall of America. So some more dreamy dreams. So again, late 2017, I'm driving a hoverboat into a tunnel or cave filled with water. The water is full of Nazi soldiers, and we're driving over their heads, machine gunning them.
Oh, wow.
Walking away from war, we decide to run away together to a faraway place. That's odd because I don't know who I was like running away with. Traveling to an African country, hanging out in a small rural airport. It's very hot. Bill Murray is there. I try not to stare or bother him, waiting for the plane to pick us up. Walking on the top of a suburban hillside. It is windy and the sky is dark and full of clouds. It has rained recently. The trees are green. Driving a truck and meet an enormous chaotic being on the side of the road. Man with bird's wings, tentacles, and peacock feathers. Always shifting shape, writhing chaos, colors constantly shifting across entire spectrum. I know this is the demiurge Satan, Lucifer. He talks to me in a casual tone and lets me know that he's not so bad and gets a bad rap.
These are incredible. And these are your dreamy dreams. I mean, these.
Yeah, some of these, like this is an interesting one, I think, because it was very surreal, and I'm interested in seeing what y'all think about this. So I'll skip the first part of it, but basically I dreamed I was in Paris with someone and we were like running away from someone. We got to this forested area. It was very like dense, like kind of jungle. And there were broken down cars and sort of metal junk everywhere, almost like it'd been a city once, but it had been like kind of overgrown. There was a river and stream nearby, and I saw an enormous beetle crawling on a flat piece of metal. Ants swarmed from underneath the beetle and started disassembling it. They took off the eyes first. I tried to capture this on my phone, but it would only record a small bit. As they dug further into the beetle, they found and pulled off even more huge circular black insectoid eyes, dozens inside. Like they opened up its eyes and there were smaller eyes inside of it.
Oh,
Eventually,
wow.
they completely broke it down and retreated. Then a swarm of red-winged blackbirds burst from the underbrush and picked up various things. One was a turtle they carried high into the sky before dropping it to the earth in order to kill it. They also picked up my phone and dumped it in the water of the stream where I picked it up before it sank. The swarm disappeared into a cliff cave opening.
So, okay, let's just talk about this dream for a minute. Do you remember dreaming it?
I do remember dreaming it because I more specifically remember the beetle being like sort of torn apart by these ants because of how surreal it was. Because it was like there were things inside the beetle that they were pulling out and taking off into like holes in the ground.
And so what was the feeling you were getting from that?
I was like absolutely horrified and like disgusted at what was happening. because it was like I was viewing some sort of like visceral part of nature that I wasn't supposed to be.
Mm-hmm. So did you feel kind of like were you a spy in a weird way? Did you have a secret eye into this, or were you part of the environment?
In the dream, I was like physically present.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't like a sort of a third person camera kind of thing. It was like I was really there. But I think, like sort of the idea that I felt like I wasn't supposed to be watching it was sort of reflected in the fact that I tried to like record what was happening, but like my phone wouldn't record it for some reason. And then
it was taken.
yeah, and then it was taken away from me.
So, okay, when you come to from this, do you remember processing it? How did you come to terms with this symbology?
I don't think I've really thought about it in terms of its like symbology. I think I was just so sort of horrified and disgusted by it, like when I woke up, that I just wanted to get it out of my mind. I mean, I wrote it down, but
Yeah.
it was sort of like seeing something like that happen, like terrified me for some reason.
Yeah. Well, it is. I mean, it's a pretty potent image that you painted in my head for sure. And so this is kind of an aside. However, because this imagery is so great, do you take your dreams and find any? Do you make art from your dreams?
I don't. I typically don't.
Because I mean that I want to see a painting of that, or some sort of short Dada video or something, because it's such great imagery.
In some ways I do, but more specifically one recurring element of several dreams. Like I don't know how many people you talk to that have this, but I sort of have one place that I've had many dreams about that I've come back to multiple times.
Yes, and, I'm always asking this.
Yeah, and I have made art of it. I mean, it currently is part of an enormous art project that I've been working on for years.
Can you tell us about this place?
Yeah, so it's a tower that is sort of in a dream version of my hometown. And it's a tower that's made up of a bunch of different sort of crumbling buildings, and it's higher than any other building around it. It just keeps going forever up into the sky. And it's just like rubble, and every time I dream about it, like I get into it and like I start climbing it, and you know, it's full of places that look they were lived in but have like fell to ruin, like broken chairs and desks and that sort of thing. And it's like a tower of trash basically. And I've like never gotten to the top of it. Always like wake up at some point, but I've climbed very high in it. And it sort of led to like several different sort of projects I've worked on that involve towers, sort of a lifelong fascination with towers because of it.
So this tower, how often does it morph? Well, for you, like for me, there's the same places I go, but they're always different, yet it's the same place.
Yeah, I mean, it's always different every time I have a dream about it.
Okay, so it's not static.
Yeah, like from the outside, it looks the same basically. But once I'm inside of it, like I've never like mentally mapped it out or anything, or
yeah,
really.
Interesting. And have you noted with this place any kind of synchronicity or maybe common thread in your waking life, that when you dream of it, is there something possible that might trigger it each time from your waking life?
That I'm not sure about. I actually haven't dreamt about it since I've been living in Minnesota, so maybe that is a clue. And I mean, I could psychoanalyze it and say that it somehow sort of represents all the debris of my sort of former life there. But yeah,
well, just as soon as you do that, it'll pop up though. I mean, I think these places continue throughout our lives.
Yeah, and I mean, you know, I'm the kind of person who, because of my out-of-body experiences, like I don't consider the dream world like to be something that is just inside my head.
Yes.
So like it is a real place. So, you know, looking at it from a sort of material, like psychoanalytic framework doesn't really work either, at least in my, I may have built it, but it exists independent of me, I think.
Yeah, I think it's important to strip everything we think we know about the dream world in order to actually access it. So, I mean, it's nice to play fodder, and it's nice fodder for like psychological discussions and neurological discussions and all this stuff that we have here in the outer world. But we somehow, in doing that, we're separating ourselves from it, like we do with death, you know, where we all have access and we are all valid in our access, and our experiences are all different, except for we do have overlap. So, all right, I want to hear about, I'm interested now. I wanted to kind of get your general dreamscape, which seems to be quite fanciful and beautiful. And I didn't hear you say it, but I was, in the picture you painted in my head, it was very, the colors were there. The spectrum of colors there. Is this correct?
Yeah, generally my dreams are like almost grotesquely colorful.
Yeah.
Like things are sort of more vivid than they are in waking life.
Yeah, yeah. And how about audio, the sound?
I don't know. I never really thought about the sound in my dreams. I mean, I don't know of it being sort of any different than sort of waking life. Generally, other people can communicate with me in English. It's sort of, I've never had a dream in a foreign language or anything. And yeah, in general, it's almost indistinguishable from, you know,
from
waking
here.
existence. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk paralysis before we get into lucidity and OBEs. When was the first time you experienced sleep paralysis, and would you share that experience if in your memory, from your memory of it?
Yeah, I don't remember what age I was, but it was fairly young. It would have been right around the time Sightings was still on TV.
When was that?
Probably like
I've watched so little TV in my life.
probably like 93, 94.
Okay.
So.
Oh, I love that period of time.
Yeah, so I was you know, at the time watching like the X-Files and stuff. I was terrified of having being abducted by aliens, and watching shows like Sightings and Unsolved Mysteries didn't help that fear at all.
Yeah.
So my first real sleep paralysis experience that I remember, I actually woke up into it. I woke up in bed. I remember looking at my clock and seeing the time, and outside like my window there were like kind of like multicolored lights that were like shining in, and there was just like a hellish racket, like something was like hovering over my house or something, just like noise. And I couldn't move. I was totally frozen in bed, and it and this theme comes back, but it was like I just hear like a great wind, like just wind rushing everywhere, and I get kind of freaked out because I notice my door is open. I look at my bedroom door, and I can see that there's like something standing like in the crack of the door. It opens the door, and sort of this little black figure like shuffles into my room, and it moves like a marionette, almost like a puppet. Like it doesn't look alive, like it's sort of jangly.
Oh,
and
this is creepy.
And it sort of like stumbles over to my bed. I can't make out any features, like it's totally black. And you know, I'm like trying to scream, but you know, I can't scream. It's just like, you know, I'm just wheezing, you know. And it stands right next to my bed, and I can feel it like looking at me, but I can't really turn to look at it. And then all of a sudden everything stops. Everything goes completely back to normal. And I remember looking at the clock and seeing that like 2 hours had passed. I think it was like 1 at the beginning. It was like 3 when I looked at the clock after everything ended. And being a little kid who watched the X-Files and shows like Unsolved Mysteries and everything, I immediately was convinced that I had been abducted by aliens. And it tied in with a lot of dreams I had as a kid too, where like, I remember this one really vivid dream where I used to sleep in like a bunk bed with my little brother. At this point, when I had this sleep paralysis experience, he had his own bedroom. But before that, we were sharing a bunk, and I was in the top bunk, he was in the bottom, and I had this like dream that I woke up and he was crying, and he was like talking to something or someone like below me. I peeked over the edge of the bed, and like sort of he was like, there was like a traditional gray alien, like kind of standing there, like talking gibberish at him. Like it was like talking, but it was just like noise. It wasn't like talking in English. And he was like crying. He was like very upset. And I just got overwhelmed with like anger. And I just like jumped off the bed onto it and just started like punching it and hitting it. And this is something that'll come back later when we get to this other experience, but I felt like I became, this is how I explained it to myself when I was a kid, I felt like I became a werewolf. Like I felt like I became like a beast, like I felt like I grew like claws and stuff, and I grabbed hold of its like eye and like peeled it off almost as if it was some sort of like shell or like a beetle shell.
There's that beetle again.
Exactly. And like it wasn't so much an eye, but like on the inside where I peeled it open, there were all of these like green and red like lights, like stars. It wasn't like it was like a robot, but almost like inside of its head was like a galaxy, if that makes sense. Like I was looking through its head into like a star field. And then I woke up. So
wow.
having had dreams like this, and then having this sort of missing time, lights outside my window, weird thing walking in my room at night, I became convinced that I was being abducted by aliens. And it didn't help around the same time too that the same guy who got me into the occult spent the night at my house, and the next morning, you know, I didn't dream or anything that night. I just remember waking up. He told me that he woke up in the middle of the night. He had slept on the floor while I had slept on the bed in my room. He told me that he woke up in the middle of the night, and I was sitting straight up in bed, and sitting next to me was like a gray. And he said that I looked at him and said, "It's okay, Nick, go back to sleep." And then the gray looked at him and he went back to sleep. Now, this person, they told me a lot of stories. So I really have no idea if they were just messing with me or just saying that. But all of these things combined made me terrified that I was, you know, experiencing something like that. It wasn't until, and I had a few other sleep paralysis experiences, but none of them as sort of fit that narrative that the first one had. I remember the second really big one that stood out in my head. I was stuck in my bed, and it sounded like there was a party going on in like my parents' house, as if like I could hear like dishes clinking and glasses and like chatter, and like it sounded like there were dozens of people in the house, like having like a house party or something, like a dinner party. And you know, I can't move, I can't get up and do anything. And then while I'm laying there, I hear this woman's voice in Spanish speaking in my ear, and she goes, "Silencio, silencio." And then like I wake up, or you know, like I get out of the sleep paralysis. And
had you just seen Mulholland Drive?
No, I know where it
I love that scene, Jerry.
I know where it actually came from at the time, but it's someone else's story, so I can't exactly tell it. But I know where I got that mental image from, and it was a story that someone had told me about their childhood. But so, you know, I didn't know what to do about the sleep paralysis experiences. I tried to tell my dad about them, and he just sort of like was like, yeah, sometimes when I was a kid, I would wake up at night and I would feel like there was something sitting on my chest. Classic sort of like hag
Yeah.
experience.
Yeah.
So, he had them, but he never really talked to me about them. He's a very kind of closed off guy. He doesn't really talk about his emotions or his childhood or anything at all to me. And to make matters worse, on the abduction side of things, I was watching some like made for TV movie about like hybrid children or something, and like alien abduction with my mom at the time. And well, my mom.
I was trying to process that.
Yeah. So
what does Wren mean here?
So at one point she looks like me dead in the eyes and says, that really happens to some people, like referencing like abduction. And it was just like, thanks, Mom. This is exactly what I need to hear, given everything that's going on right with me right now. But it wasn't until I'm trying to remember where I first heard about like astral projection or out of body travel. Honestly, don't know where I like first heard of it. My first big resource for it was actually I think I know what it is now. Jerry, you probably know this. What is it? Donald Michael Craig or David Michael Craig?
Michael
the guy who
David Craig, isn't it?
Michael
or
David
Craig. Mike. Oh God! Now that of course you
What
twisted
did he
it
write?
in my
What did he
head.
write? I don't remember.
Modern Magic. He wrote a book on ceremonial magic called Modern Magic.
He's famous. I mean, it's a
Yeah. That was like my first book on the occult that I bought for like myself.
Yes.
And like worked through and stuff. And so I think he talks about astral projection at some point in it. But I picked up a copy of Robert Bruce's Astral Dynamics, which actually was like very much, a lot of older spiritualists, especially like the Golden Dawn stuff or stuff inherited from Victorian spiritualism. It sort of treats astral travel as this very baroque, like complicated thing. And It wasn't until I read Bruce's Astral Dynamics that I was like, oh, actually, it's a lot simpler than these people are making it out to be, and you don't have to worry about your silver chain and cleansing yourself before you do it, everything. So, from reading,
but in that, Wren, there is a certain. I always just took out of that because that was all cumbersome. But I did take out. There is a certain. They're setting you up for the fact that it's real. It's really real, and there are dangers therein.
Yeah,
there's certainly, in my experience, because it's not just you, it's everyone.
Yeah, and
everything.
I'll talk about some encounters later.
Yes,
to get back to some stuff. But so Robert Bruce's book sort of taught me how to have my first willful sort of out of body experience. And I still remember like the first time, like I sort of halfway did it, like I could feel my arm rising, even though my arm wasn't rising, like I realized at that point that sort of the sleep paralysis state that I experience is like the precursor to that, and I was like, oh, this is actually a blessing because it's easy for me to have sleep paralysis experiences. So it's going to be easy for me to have OBEs. And yeah, I still remember that, like that first time I did it, I felt like I was falling through my bed. Like I imagined myself like falling over and over and over again, and kept doing it until I could really feel it. And then I really did just like fall through my bed, and then, like that first time you sort of float around your room like a ghost is absolutely amazing. Even though it didn't last very long, I immediately like flew through my door and like went to my parents' room, and like I jumped around on the bed, or at least imagined I was jumping around the bed, and was like, wake up, wake up, wake up. Can you see me? Can you see me? And then I remember my mom's like eyes like opened, and she like looked at me. And then I got really embarrassed that I wasn't out of body, and then I had just like went into their room at night and was like jumping around in the bed. And that made me snap back into my body.
Did you talk to her about that? Was there any communication about that later?
I think I did, but she didn't remember anything.
Yeah. Oh, that's interesting though, that she looked at you.
Yeah, I think that's something, I don't know. My theory about this is that sometimes people are also either out of body, or like they see you, but they're not seeing you with their conscious mind.
Yes.
So they don't really remember it.
Yes.
Like I've had out of body experiences where I like saw and talked to my little brother, even though he was asleep at the time as well. So
yeah.
And he didn't remember it. So
so move from this kind of layer where you've just now gotten to the point where you're stretching your astral body, you've been around your room and your house, to now full on OBEs.
So I first started to realize that, like, I had these like kind of initial little travels around like my local area, like I'd go outside and I would fly up into the air and they'd get really sick to my stomach. I'm not really afraid of heights, but when you all of a sudden jump 100 feet into the air, it makes your stomach drop no matter how comfortable you are.
There's a visceral experience. It really is true.
Yeah. And I started to realize that, like, at least my local area, once I started to stray out of that area, it would shift from being like, I guess, the real world, if you want to use that term, to more sort of like dreamlands. I would start kind of going to places that I knew didn't exist, or at least didn't exist in material reality. Like I would, I don't know. There's a good example of this happening recently that I could talk about.
Please do.
So my most recent out-of-body experiences, just a few weeks ago, I went out of body and my apartment was the same, and knowing what was going on and being ready for it, I immediately just like ran down the hallway and I just like took a running leap through my roof or through my ceiling. And I felt like I was, because there are apartments above me, and I felt like I was going through them. But when I got to the roof, I wasn't any longer in like the area of my apartment. I was all of a sudden somewhere completely different. I was like somewhere, it looked like the Pacific Northwest or something, or at least what I imagine the Pacific Northwest to look like. And that's always been my experience with OBEs. The minute you sort of leave the area that your mind can comfortably reconstruct from memory, like you start shifting into somewhere else. And maybe it's a lucid dream, but again, I don't think these things are all in your head. So
So, well, actually, would you speak more? For some reason, I thought there was going to be more there. Will you speak more to that idea of when you get out of where your brain actually is able to fill in the blanks with familiar stuff that's familiar from waking life? And when you truly get astral and you're experiencing fantastical stuff that is, it's far out. How do you experience that, and maybe tie in your experience with others that you encounter, other beings, other people, whatever you want to throw in there?
So yeah, I do. I was going to say I don't typically come across other beings that often, but now that I think about it, almost every time I do. Like one
I
vivid
find they're always there.
Yeah, they're always kind of lurking about. I mean, like the most vivid sort of early experience of this, I had a spontaneous OBE when I was probably like 22 or something, 21, 22. And I floated through the roof of this place I was staying at that night. And I immediately was like somewhere else. It looked like a kind of like a park to me, like they were like kind of a wooded area, trees and stuff, but it looked maintained, and there was like a path, and like slowly gliding down this path like were like cars that had all of their lights turned off, and we're just like slowly driving down this path. So I kept going down the path, and I ran into sort of this guy sitting on a bench, and at first he didn't see me, and I like kind of called out to him, because I was interested in knowing if he could see me or hear me. And I, honestly didn't think he would, because this is like my first time encountering something other than me. And it like surprised me when he like turned and immediately like looked at me, and his like eyes got really wide, and he like took off into the air, like he flew away. And I was like, oh my God, he's like somebody else that's doing this. Like
Yes.
I've got to talk to him. Like I've got to ask him. And I was like, wait. And like I started chasing him, and that only made it worse. Like he kept going faster and faster, and I couldn't catch up to him. And he
Oh,
like outran.
wow.
And that was
You were his nightmare.
yeah, it was like I've always thought about like, what did I look like to this guy that scared him so bad?
Right.
And oh, go ahead.
No. It's incredible is all I wanted to say.
Yeah. And I've talked about this in some other shows too, but like I remember one like sort of vivid encounter with sort of the beastlies that lurk. I had an out-of-body experience, and I wanted to go somewhere else, but I didn't want to go to like dreamlands. I wanted to like go somewhere physical in like base reality. So I don't know, Robert Monroe talks about the way this feels, and maybe you've experienced this too, but like when you're in the out-of-body state, like you're not limited by time and space. Like you can travel anywhere instantly,
Right.
anywhere in the universe. So but it feels like you're twisting, like your whole being is like twisting and like expanding, and it's like a rubber band, like you snap into the other place.
Yes, like you snap back into your body. It's like that whole kind of that snap thing's a big deal, or at least it is for me.
Yeah, it feels like you're like twisting and then sort of snapping into the other place. And so I went to my like dad's house where like I grew up, and I like sort of materialized in the backyard. Everything looked normal. It didn't look dreamy. Like it looked like reality. I remember it was like early morning, which was consistent with what time it was supposed to be. And there was sort of like wind in the trees and stuff. It was very realistic. I'll put it that way. And I could kind of see down into the driveway, and I saw my cat that lives with my dad. I guess my dad's cat now, but it used to be my cat. And he was walking like kind of up into the neighbor's driveway. He likes to lurk around at night. So I wanted to see if he could see me. It's like I flew down and was like, hey, like trying to get his attention. He couldn't see me. He didn't notice me at all. But as I'm doing this, I like sort of in my periphery start to see like shapes, like shadows moving. And I noticed that like we're being circled by this like sort of pack of like shadowy dogs. I mean, I say dogs, but they're like the size of like buffalo. Like they're these enormous shadowy dogs.
Oh my.
And I felt like they were stalking him, but now they noticed me, and now they were stalking me. And I just got really indignant about it. Like it didn't scare me at all. And I was just like, I started laughing about it. And I was like, you guys don't scare me. And I just like waved my hand at one of them, and it just blew away like into dust.
That's great. That's excellent.
All the others just ran away. Like they didn't want none of it.
There's yeah, I like this sense of will that you seem to possess in these altered states or alternate realities. Because there's just that scenario alone, there are ways you could have gone. Like these shadowy figures could have been very scary, and then the minute you present fear, then they feed off of that, of course, as you know. And it would have been a different scenario. So that says a lot about you, Wren.
Well, it's very frustrating when I see people talk about shadow people when they're having like sleep paralysis. Like in particular, have you seen that documentary, The Nightmare, about people that are suffering from sleep paralysis?
No, but I need to be linked that.
It's a really amazing documentary, and a lot of the people in it, they do like these reenactments, but almost every person who has a sleep paralysis experience sees like these like shadowy figures or shadow people.
It's very common. I think it's almost always there.
Yeah, and they're all completely terrified out of their minds by it. And there's one guy in particular who actually has a full-blown out-of-body experience. He remembers looking back and seeing his body. He even sees his like silver chain, which I've never actually seen. And he like is sort of approached by a hat man, like shadowy figure, and like his two little henchmen, and they tell him to get back in his body, and he gets so scared that he does it. And that just frustrates me to no end, because I'm like, dude, those are the dwellers at the threshold. Like they're your test. You know, they're testing you. You just tell them to fuck off, and they'll leave you alone. But people are so terrified of it. And I try to explain to people that in sort of the imaginary realm, in the dreamlands, like your only currency is your imagination and your willpower.
Yes.
Like it doesn't matter how physically strong you are. It doesn't matter how emotionally strong you are. It's all about like your imagination and your confidence. And if you feel confident and you have a greater imagination than something else, like you'll win. And that's a lot of people don't realize. These things are just you know, they're just shadows. They don't have imaginations. You do. You're a human being and you have an imagination. You can be anything you want to be there.
Not to mention they're part of your subconscious.
Yeah. I mean, you know, some of them might be.
I think that's up for debate. I don't
Yeah.
want to get too solid in that.
I've come across some things that I don't think, like, I mean, Jerry, I told you about this one. I'll recount it for the show, but I had I've never come across anything in an out-of-body state that I couldn't handle. The dog things, like whatever, shadow people, other entities, like whatever. Nothing's ever like tussled with me really.
Mm-hmm.
But then a couple of months ago now, I had this experience where I was going to sleep. I was lying on my side in bed, and I started to feel like the sleep paralysis come on. Like I could hear the like sort of rushing wind and the buzzing in my body, like the vibrations.
Mm-hmm.
And something happened that I'd never had happen to me before, aside from the lady whispering to me. But I heard like someone in the room behind me like talking and saying things, and I couldn't understand what they were saying at first, but I felt like I wanted to get up and like look and see who it was. And then I heard this like woman's voice say like, no, don't get up, stay here with me. And I felt something crawl into bed with me. Like I literally felt the bed like, you know, squish down, and I felt this body like slide in behind me and like put its arm around me. And like I immediately like was like, hell no, we're not doing this.
I would have been, girl, please. No,
because you know things don't normally scare me in that state, but that like legitimately kind of spooked me.
Yeah, it's very creepy
because it was so realistic.
Mm-hmm.
So I immediately got up, but instead of getting up in my physical body, I got up in my, you know, sublime body or whatever you want to call it, my energy body.
Yes.
So before I could turn around and see what it was, I felt like something jump on my back. And apparently this is a common thing. Like it's even called like you have a witch riding your back.
Right, the hag riding. It's called hag riding. Yeah.
Yeah, and see, I'd never heard of I'd heard about like hags sitting on chests, but I never heard of a hag riding before. So yeah, this thing jumped on my back, and it felt like it just glommed on. Like I was like reaching behind me and like clawing at it and like wrestling with it. And I started trying to think, like I was sort of stumbling around the room wrestling with this thing, and I started thinking like, well, what do people usually do in this situation? And you know, I've heard about people like praying to God or like praying to Christ and making it go away. So I was like, you know, in the name of Christ, I compel you to like get on back, whatever. And it didn't do anything because I don't really believe in Jesus.
Yeah, I think that you have to actually believe what you're saying. It's some sort of conviction.
Yeah, so it didn't work. And I was like, okay, well, what do we do now? I got to get this thing off of me. So I was like, well, just believe in myself. And I said, I abjure you. Like I tell you to get off my back.
Yes. Ooh,
and that
good.
worked. So I felt it like kind of peel off, like I was peeling off an octopus, and I threw it onto the bed, and that's exactly what it looked like. It looked like just this lumpy black mass of like tentacles.
Those are the energy vampires in the fourth dimension.
Yeah, Well,
That's totally, yeah, with that
People can
local.
see them on other people too. Some people
yeah.
can. Yeah.
I mean, maybe it was trying to make me a host or something. I don't know, but
Oh, you
yeah, it
were
looked
a host until you got
For
rid of
whatever
it.
time
Yeah.
that was, yeah.
yeah, it just looked like like I said, it just looked like a lumpy black mass of tentacles. And then I got so angry because nothing had ever messed with me like that in an
Hmm.
out of body state. Nothing that effectively. Nothing had ever like wrestled with me before like that. So I just got so angry and I was just like, how dare this thing? How dare this thing do this to me? And I sort of had that same feeling. I remember I talked before about how like I became a werewolf in that dream where I
Hmm.
attacked that gray. That's sort of like how I felt. Like I felt like I was becoming a beast. And I can actually see like I normally don't see like my hands or body when I'm in an out of body state, but I could see sort of like my hands growing in these large claws, and I felt like I was becoming, huge and beastly. And I just grabbed it and started ripping it apart, and I started eating it. Like I just like
Oh,
opened my
rock
mouth and started
on.
just shoving it down my mouth, and like because I was like, I'm going to devour this thing. Like this thing isn't coming back from this. It's not
Yeah,
going to escape.
In a
yeah.
way, too, you've recovered the energy that it took from you by eating it.
And
Yeah.
and then some. All its energy.
Yeah, maybe I somehow like instinctively knew that's what I should be doing, but I still remember the way it felt in my
Mm.
mouth, even though I wasn't physically eating this thing, but it like it felt like it's like a spandex ball filled with sand.
Oh,
Like it was like
wow.
gritty, and I just like shoved it all down my throat and like ate it, and then I was like, okay, well that's done, so let's go explore the dreamlands. Like went off and had some explorations, but yeah, like that's the only time I've ever had something attack me that I felt like it took more than just like a wave of my hand to make it go away. But even then, it's like maybe it would
You
have if it hadn't jumped on my back and scared me so bad to begin
No,
with.
I don't think
right.
those things are very smart. So, I mean, I wouldn't look at it as a personal attack.
Yeah, well, it was interesting because like a couple weeks before that, I had had another out of body experience in the same room, and during it I had noticed there was this like kind of tentacled orby mass hovering near my bed, um, but it didn't feel like malicious, and I sort of just left it alone. I was like, live and let live. It wasn't trying to scare me. It was just I thought maybe because sometimes I feel like when you have these experiences, like you kind of light up like a beacon and things like start coming to check you out and like see what's
Hmm.
going on.
Yes, I agree.
Only if you let that light out.
It's kind of, I don't know. It seems like something you can't control in a weird way.
Oh, really?
I've
Like
heard
a light's turned on. Like it's like your inner flame, whatever that is.
I've heard people say the same about doing like occult rituals and stuff. Like it sort of makes you light up on the sort of dreamlands, like you become like
Hmm.
a beacon.
Magically light up.
Yeah, magically light up.
Mhm.
So, I just figured maybe it was something just checking me out, seeing what was going on, and if it wasn't threatening me or making some sort of posture, I wasn't going to mess with it. So I just left it alone and went exploring. And I sort of wonder if it was the same thing. Like maybe it was scoping me out, and
How
maybe it
long ago was this, Ren?
this is I had to look at the date on Twitter. I
It's like
like
a month
posted.
ago or 2 months ago. It was
Yeah,
recent.
Oh,
it's
Mm-hmm.
probably
it's
2
really
months ago.
recent.
Yeah,
Oh
it's
my
really recent.
goodness. That's interesting
I just
with
thought of an
this.
interesting analog too for the lighting up. If you remember in American Gods, when Shadow's wife saw him after she was dead.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Mhm.
That is
Mhm.
that is good, Jerry.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's interesting that this was a recent thing. So Wren is prolific with this stuff, advanced, definitely advanced. And since the big eclipse, and in this recent period of time we're in, that he would encounter that this would happen is very significant.
Well, there was the moon thing too.
Right, and the moon. Right. Well, the eclipse. Yeah.
No,
That I.
his moon thing.
Oh, that's right. The lunar. Right. Right.
The moon
Yeah,
initiation of the spheres.
Yeah.
yeah. I did a lunar initiation several months ago, and one of the I called on Hecate, and one of the things I asked her to do, and I made a talisman for it and stuff, was that she increase like my ability to see into the astral and like give me more out of body experiences. And it's panned out. I've had more out of body experiences in the last like probably 3 or 4 months than I've had in years. Like,
Yeah, if you ask if you're sincere and you ask and you go through those motions,
mhm.
Dude, it was
it will
from that
happen.
killer table you made.
Oh yeah, I made a table of practice to do
Yeah.
that. Spent weeks working on it. Yeah,
It's gorgeous.
thank you.
So, do you? I think you mentioned this earlier, and I think that was pretty much the answer. But so you don't experience or haven't encountered dead people that you've known in waking life.
Not that I know of. I don't think I've ever had a dream or encountered in an out of body experience anyone that I know that has died.
Okay, and then also you touched on this, but I want a little more depth on it. Prophetic stuff or dreaming true, is this something that you experience more often than the Mall of America experience?
No, as far as I know, that is, I think, the only sort of prophetic dream I've ever had. If there were others, I've had a lot of like synchronicity and thing happen, synchronistic kind of things happen, but you know, everyone has those. But in terms of actually having like a honestly prophetic dream, I think that's the only example that I can think of.
That's solid. I mean, that's a dead hit. So
Yeah.
that's good. And what about, yeah, okay, so deja vu. What's your
Mhm.
experience of it, and how does it tie into all of this?
I do have a lot of deja vu. And sometimes I wonder if I've I get like this gut feeling that I've dreamed about this before, but I don't remember it. You know, like I don't remember the dream.
Mm-hmm.
At that point, it's impossible to tell too. It's impossible to tell, did I have a dream about this or am I just imagining I've
Thank
had a
you.
dream?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
I just thought of something too. I don't know. The deja vu experience compared with do they occur around synchronicities, or is there any correlation between it?
Generally, no. Most of my synchronistic stuff usually goes with like a theme.
Yeah.
Like I start writing a short story about a place called Saint Valencia, and then I'm riding in the car with a friend, and they put on an album that I've never heard before, and one of the songs they're singing about is like a town called Valencia. It's like that kind of thing.
Yeah, that's so great.
Like the day you guys said you were going to do the moon thing, and I get in my car and the song Luna comes up, right?
Yeah, it's sort of like that kind of thing. It's never like prophetic, really. Just like, it's like this idea was apparently in my head
Yes.
prior to me like hearing about it.
So, all right, what do you make of what what do you think is actually going on in when you're out of body? What's that state of being in balance with this state of being? What's the difference between them?
Well, I've got I got several ideas about that, I guess. I don't know if any of them are true. They're just hunches. I tend to follow really closely to sort of the same ideas that Robert Monroe has
Mm-hmm.
about the out of body state. I do think it's some sort of non-local consciousness, but I think where people maybe mess up is to maybe not remember that it's not only non-local, but it's non-temporal as well. Like it's one aspect of you. Let that truck go by. So yeah,
I know,
so like
sorry.
it's okay. So when you have sort of a dream or an out of body experience, and this is sort of similar to the Jane Roberts Seth stuff, like you're experiencing that through an aspect of, you know, the you. And the life you're living now. I sort of like imagine each human existence as sort of like this enormous octopus in the imaginal, and each life you live is like one of its feelers or tentacles. Like it's like a it's like a feeler, and it's feeling into the real world. But each individual life that you live and each sort of dream that you have or life that you're living now, it isn't the true you. It's just a feeler. It's a probe examining reality. And I feel like,
In a way, that's almost a simulation.
I mean, I suppose it's like
putting your toes in the water, you know, testing the temperature.
yeah.
It's
I guess,
almost, you could say it's remote viewing even.
yeah, it's almost like each person, and maybe this is kind of out of the scope of what you're asking, but I guess while we have a consciousness that's inhabiting each of our bodies that is non-local, it's just one part of some kind of greater consciousness that is made up of all the lives that you've lived and that you're going to live. Because in these places, outside of our material world that we live in right now, concepts like time don't make any sense. There is no before or after there.
Right. So when you say the greater you, what is that?
I think it's it's some kind of okay, so I'll put this literally because I think I'm coming off like a lunatic here, but let's just
Not
say
at all. You aren't, so don't worry about it.
It's
please, Wren.
We don't know our crew.
It's very hard to put this into words, but like I feel like it's some kind of extra dimensional entity that is an amalgamation of all the lived experiences in your kind of personal timeline, like past lives and future lives, because where it lives, all of those things are happening at the same time. There is no past or future.
Mm-hmm.
And I think kind of like your life here is it gaining experience, like Robert Monroe talked about this sort of that each person's life, like basically everyone's soul came from somewhere else, like nobody's native to Earth, and that you're basically on Earth living in the life that you're living right now as a way of like learning about earthly existence and like learning about life in the physical world, because where these things come from, or where these souls come from, they don't have any concepts like time, material, like matter, and because they're just it's totally outside of that frame of reference. And it's not just that you're like, I think that's what people like think about, they're worried about reincarnation because, okay, well, if you're reincarnated, like, and you don't remember who you used to be, then it's just like dying normally anyways. I think what people don't realize is that your personality right now and your life right now, it's just one aspect of some sort of greater personality that exists sort of outside of time and space, if that makes sense at all.
Makes a lot of sense, and I could easily I could see it, the way you described it too. You painted it well. With this idea too, which you answered, it kind of derails a little bit my where I like to take the show at the end before we take questions is on thoughts about death. Mm-hmm. And that is a state of consciousness and also a process of consciousness. And so with you answering this greater picture, I think then now it's like come back here and paint the idea of death now, the process of it, and what you think is going on there.
Honestly, I kind of feel like my experience of death is going to be a lot like having an out-of-body experience. I mean, from people that I know that have had near-death experiences, it sounds just like my out-of-body experiences. I think people are conscious when it's going on, and plenty of people say that when they're having an ND, like they can see people around them and see things in the local environment. Like, remember when I said at the very beginning about how I was like so afraid of death?
Yes.
So what changed that for me was when I was a teenager. I never had any like grandparents. All my grandparents were like dead before I was even born, aside from one grandmother who I didn't have a great relationship with. But I did have a really close relationship with my great uncle, who was kind of the closest to a grandfather I had. So when I was a teenager, he was dying of throat cancer. He was sort of on his deathbed in this like trailer out in rural Talladega, and he was like breathing through like a tracheotomy hole in his neck and that kind of thing. I guess we knew that like the time was close. Like we didn't know that he was, about to die, but we knew that he was very, very ill and that, he may not be around much longer. And he was totally out of it at this point too. I mean, he was basically on his deathbed. He wasn't conscious. So we went out there on one weekend to see him, kind of pay our last respects, I guess. And we went out there and we all kind of stood around his bed, and it's like this hospital bed that was like in one of the rooms in the trailer. Sort of looked at him. He wasn't conscious, so he couldn't respond or anything. And kind of everyone went back to the living room, and I wanted to go outside, because I'd been to this place like a lot. It was like a blueberry farm, and I'd been there a lot when I was a kid. So I wanted to kind of just like walk around. Specifically, there was this boat in the backyard. This boat, I'd never seen this boat in water. It was like completely old and like rusted and stuff. I don't think this boat had been in a lake in like 30 years, but it was always there. And I walk around the back of the trailer and I'm by myself, and I see the boat, and standing on the bow is like the biggest like crow I've ever seen. And the crow sort of like looks at me, and we have this like kind of moment between us where like its eyes were like intelligent, like it was looking at me. And after we stood there for a moment, like looking at each other, the crow flew off. So I went back inside, and without really thinking why I was doing this, I went back to the room that my great uncle was in. And I was like standing there looking at him for a minute. And then I noticed that something was different. And like I leaned in and like heard that he wasn't breathing anymore. Like he had passed away in like the 5 minutes that I'd been outside. And to have like such a vivid, like psychopompic experience like that, that completely changed like my view on like what death is. Cause like I knew in my heart that like that crow was either him or was taking him away, And after that, I pretty much was never scared of death again, because like that was sort of an
that's profound.
It's sort of the veil lifting moment for me.
Yeah, that's I don't know, you've just been one incredible story after another tonight, Wren. That's moving. It gave me chills when you were speaking about it.
Thank you. I mean, honestly, like I've never talked about that experience in any other shows or anything, and still even to this day, I feel like that's the most profound sort of experience I've ever had.
Yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot. It's again, I can't get away from this sense with you of wanting, there's so much you've given here that I want to see in kind of like 2D or 3D art forms, because as you're talking about this and the crow and the image of your uncle, and maybe it's the way you're communicating it. It's all like a movie moving through my head, but in a Dada type movie. Yeah, I feel like there's no reason to be afraid of death, especially once you actually get outside your body. So, okay, this was a question I had earlier and I want to get to it. I thought about it in post Horis, but I think it's relevant here. So, and it's kind of personal, so feel free to just tell me to F off. And so, because there's such clarity and so much experience here that with your dream experience, do you take any kind of like medication at all, like drugs, like for depression or all that, the SSRIs or whatever the hell they're called?
No, I was briefly on SSRIs. God, it was probably like sometime last year.
Did it affect your experience?
Yes, in that I don't remember ever dreaming while I was on them. And
That's what I'm saying. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
Well,
I don't want to necessarily, I mean, some people I think really benefit from them, but I
of
think
course.
that they really weren't for me. And I had things that I needed to deal with some other way.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not in any way looking down my nose at them. And I think I know lots of people that they have saved their lives. So I'm just talking in context to how it affects the dreamscape and the ability to have dreams and then lucid experiences and remember them.
Yeah, I mean, they completely sort of changed both my personality, like my sex life, my dreamscape, like, and that's why I stopped taking them, because they just weren't the right chemical fit for me. Now, on the other hand, I have experimented. Well, I take melatonin frequently at night when I go to sleep.
But that's different. Yeah.
So I do have more vivid dreams when I take melatonin, I found. Like I take a lot of melatonin. Most people just take one, but I usually take like 50 grams or so, or milligrams, or however many. It's like 5 of the pills that are in the bottle, and it knocks me out and it makes me have crazy dreams. Like just the other night, I took some to go to sleep, and I had like 9 distinct dreams that were all like sort of in different places, different stories, and I remembered all of them when I woke up, and I like immediately like opened up my iPhone and like recorded, like, you know, just did a voice record of like all of those dreams and everything I remembered from them, because it was so vivid.
Wow.
And I've done a little bit of experimentation with galantamine, which is it's a Alzheimer's drug. Although you can get the sort of non-prescription strength, like herbal version of it on the internet, and you just have to take it in the right dosage. It's interesting. I'd read about it somewhere that it was useful for inducing like sort of out-of-body states, and it 100% definitely makes it easier to have sleep paralysis. Like when I would experiment taking doses of galantamine before going to sleep, I would have sleep paralysis pretty much each time. But it was different in sort of a weird way. It's hard to, like, the out-of-body experience I had after taking galantamine was a bit different than any other out-of-body experience I've had otherwise. Like all I remember from the experience is feeling like I was like falling backwards through like a tunnel, and there were all these like pipes and light, like it's like the walls had pipes on them, so like I was falling through some kind of like shaft, and there were like sort of multicolored lights everywhere, and that's all I remember.
Wow.
So it was almost like too strong. You know, it was like, and you know, I guess if someone really has trouble getting into that state that they need to have an out-of-body experience, it might be useful. But
well, it just makes me curious to try it. Yeah, just to try it.
You can try it, but I guess just be warned that it may be a little overkill.
Yeah, I don't have any problem in this department, so I probably won't. Have you heard of C60?
I haven't.
It's Cliff High is really talking about it a lot, and I take it, and I can tell you it's carbon stabilized through like a 2-week centrifuge process in oils. Like I get mine in olive oil, and it's for like longevity. They're talking longevity with it, and it's for all the bridge to making your temple, your body a stronger, healthier thing. Athletes use it, and however, the crazy side effect for me, who is already a prolific dreamer, has been that it's put my dream world into turbo boost. And I was reading some I was reading some feedback from other people, and a lot of people, ironically enough, don't want to dream. They're just not able to deal with whatever the content is, and so they have found that to be a terrible side effect, and and then stop taking C60 for all of its wonderful benefits. So check into that. Like, just check into C60, and I recommend listening to Cliff High talk about it. And then also another thing I discovered along the way is potato starch. And one can mix that in water before bed. And again, I'm like Miss Organic, but one can mix that in water before bed, and it truly does work. It's absolutely amazing. Or you can, boil your potatoes, and you can, I wouldn't do myself, I wouldn't do this, but you can, eat up on some potato right before you go to bed.
I wonder if that's because it's a nightshade. Because
right, because it is in the nightshade family, tomatoes and belladonna and all that.
Yeah, because remember I was talking earlier about Benadryl. Like diphenhydramine hydrochloride, the active ingredient in Benadryl, is also a member of sort of the Jimson weed. Like,
yes,
it's an atropine alkaloid, and so
right.
I wonder if it has sort of the same effect.
I had assumed it is probably, I had made this connection as well. But all I'm saying is definitively, it has definitely worked for me in the past. Since I like to intermittent fast as you do, I don't like to take anything a few hours before I go to bed. So I get the sleep time before and after. And it's just easy to have a nice fast without much worry. So I stopped doing that. But fortunately, C60 came into my life. Which I can't, pardon me?
What actually is it? Is it like cannabis oil or something? Or
no, it's actual carbon that has been stabilized in an oil, and somehow the process of stabilizing the carbon through a centrifuge somehow transforms it. I'm not exactly 100%. I cannot go on about the science of it. I don't know. I'm a layman, but that's what I'm saying. Seek out like Cliff High. If you just type in carbon C60, but if you go C60 and Cliff High, you're going to get that little extra that Cliff brings to the table. Okay. And then I found, I looked up what I wanted, and I got in. There's some expensive stuff out there, but there are also people doing it in the same method, and it's cheaper and it's just the same. I've tried both, and it takes, like, what I get takes 2 weeks to order. They make it to order, so I order it and they centrifuge it, and I get it in like 3 weeks. But I mean, and no one's paying me for this. That's why I'm not giving brands or anything. It's changed my life. And in specific to this show, it's changed my dream life.
How does it change your dreams? I mean, you have just more lucidity or more vividness?
I don't know if it's because it's actually helping my physical body in really profound ways, but I have more actual clarity. Yes, lucidity is always there, but I'm not always clear in lucidity. Yeah. And so I think the experiences, and I'm not one to have anxiety dreams, although they have happened, and they will happen. And they can happen, of course. There's a quality that seems more like I could stay. I don't know how to describe that. There's a quality like I feel like I'm on a bridge in a weird way, that I'm able, like, it's hemi-syncing me in my brain or somehow. I don't know, Wren, how to describe it. And I'm, of course, listen to me, I'm terrible at describing things like this. This is why I write poetry. But I would be curious if you try it, to hear your interpretation, because you are very clear in these kinds of ways.
Yeah, I'd love to try it. I mean,
so I'll send you a link to where I get mine, so you can at least see that, and that way it's it's offline, and it's not like I'm pushing that. But do your work, your homework.
Yeah. I mean, anything that, like, I consider dreaming like a profound technology.
Yes.
And anything that helps sort of enable that to work more effectively, I'm down for. Because there's something like, I'd be curious about your thoughts on this. Something that I have been kind of obsessed with recently is finding stories of people who have experienced time dilation in their dreams, like that they've had a dream that seemed like it lasted weeks or days.
Yes.
And like, have you ever experienced that?
Yes. Yeah. Often throughout my life.
Huh.
Yeah. And I mean, my dream life is so off the hooks. That's why I'm always, my whole life I've been talking to people about dreams and trying to, I'm just still trying to understand, you know. And so I've gone through all the routes. So I mean, I went through the whole Jungian thing, trying to get some more insight. What I have found from everyone in the Monroe Institute, all this stuff, is that in the end, nobody has the game on it, right? We all have this experience, we all have access to it, and I haven't found anyone that is exactly, you know, you can't say, well, the dream world is over here on the corner of, you know, bullshit and reality street, you know, these streets over here, that angle. And so that's why I keep talking to people, and I'm open to people across the board, because it's bringing in, I'm slowly putting together an idea of what that is to me, that world. And the time thing, where I've been in dreams where I felt like lifetimes, like there was one I lived a whole life, and I came back, I was extremely upset. I felt like I had been taken away from a life I really loved. I thought I was living that life in this dream that was like, you know, who knows how long in our waking life it was. It could have been 15 minutes, Wren. It could have been 2. And it could have been an 8-hour sleep cycle. I don't know. It's unlikely. However, it was so vivid and so real that this felt like where I came after I died in that. So I died. I had a whole life and I died, and I woke up back in my life here.
Yeah, it makes me wonder if that is literally true.
If we're bouncing back and forth.
Yeah, if that was literally another life that you led, or one of your, you know, like I said about the feelers, like that was one of the feelers' existences.
Well, the thing that made that dream interesting was when, especially looking back at it now, I couldn't. Of course, it would be this way too, because I'm always attracted to things, kind of old things. So 1890s, 1920s, and then stuff older. So it's hard to, if you were like to pop up at my house as a dream person here, you wouldn't maybe not know what era you're in, because there's such a saturation of era here, and it's not modern. And so that dream in particular, I was trying to pinpoint time, and it was like this, you know, it was, I couldn't tell you if it was 1980s, 2000, you know, 1880s. There was no sense of an era, which also is strange. And then now that I think about it, you know, when I do think about it, it's like it's all like, my life that I've lived is niche. Like the earlier life is all kind of dreamy, right? How your past is somehow faded, but there are markers, you know, that you can remember. So it's gone that route. And so, yeah, it's fascinating. I would have thought you to have had these big time type dreams.
I have one time, and that's why I'm so fascinated with it. When I was
in
high school.
Share it?
Yeah, I was in high school at the time, and I had a dream that lasted at least what subjectively seemed like 2 or so weeks. And I, in the dream, was some sort of nomad in the desert, and I was like, there were a lot of camels, and I was with a group of people, and we were traveling kind of across the desert. And you know, at night, we would, you know, sort of travel. We had all these like kind of tents and yurts and stuff that we would sleep in.
Oh, I love that.
And you know, it didn't seem like modern time at all. It seemed, but then again, you know, who am I to say that it wasn't modern time, or that it wasn't maybe the future? I really don't know. The only thing I guess I can say is that I wasn't me as I know me right now.
Yes.
Like I was living a completely different life. And yeah, I mean, I remember like day to day, going to sleep at night, like waking up and sort of living this whole other life. And I remember waking up and just feeling completely like exhausted, like, just blown away. Like, wow, I was in that for 2 weeks,
It's like you were playing Roy.
Yeah, exactly. And, the idea of that fascinates me because I'm like, what if we could control that?
Yes.
What if you could put yourself in a lucid dream state and then say, okay, this dream is going to last 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
And then, like, I don't know, do research. Think of all the books you could read in 3 years, even though, I've heard people say it's hard to read things in an out-of-body state. I've never actually tried to read anything in a dream, so I don't know.
We've had plenty of people that say they read just fine on this show.
Yeah, I can't remember ever like reading anything in a dream, but you know what I'm saying? Like, what if we could somehow harness that aspect of the like dream technology, as it were?
I agree. I
What
think
if it's
we're missing
already
out.
been harnessed?
Well, there's that, and that
Maybe.
comes back to that whole freedom aspect that you touched on in the very beginning.
Mm-hmm.
Well, apparently humans don't necessarily respond to the consent aspect that these spirits do and entities. I mean, that seems to be the way it looks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's one thing too. I like dabble in a lot of occult fields, like doing like goetic stuff and chaos magic and stuff. But a part of me is started to almost like come home to like OBs and like dream technology, because I think what I'm starting to realize, like I'm about to start this sort of remote viewing experiment with a group of people. And
yes, Suzanne just told me about that. I'm in,
yeah.
by the way.
Okay, well, I
I'm putting my name in.
I gotta send you the consent form for it.
Yes, thank you.
But that's sort of, I was thinking about myself doing it, because in the role that I'm going to be doing an experiment, I'm not going to be participating as a viewer, because I'm going to be the experimenter or the scientist, quote unquote. So, but I think about myself doing remote viewing, and I'm like, maybe I'd be good at it. I don't know. I've never tried it, but part of me just thinks that maybe some people just have like their own talents, and maybe my talent is doing like out of body work and dream work. I can learn all these other things. I can learn how to do sigils, and I can learn how to summon demons. But I think in the end, I'm going to come back to doing out of body work and dream work is like the thing that I've always naturally been able to do without having to learn anything or having to force anything or having to train myself. It's just that's maybe my talent.
Well, one thing that strikes me, and this is another reason why I like to get the little tiny bit of astro stuff we get, which is usually just the sun sign. But you're Pisces, right? That's what you said, I believe. And the water signs and Pisces are, like one of the things is you're just naturally psychic and naturally able to move into these etheric type realms. And so, and time and again in these discussions, it's always the water signs that really have these bring amazing content like this. It's just, I'm not blown away anymore by it. And when whatever you think of astrology, whatever anyone in the world thinks of astrology, I see consistent patterns, and this is one of them.
Yeah, I've only recently had like a come to Jesus moment with astrology. I used to sort of always think it was just hocus pocus, even though I believe in plenty of woo stuff. I just, something about astrology, maybe it's like the idea that there's like no free will, like everything about your personality and like talents and stuff is like shaped by the date you were born on a planet that like,
think of it more as a template though, instead of
well,
cast in iron kind of thing.
Well, that's what I originally thought. Yeah. And so what has come to light for me recently is that astrology was just kind of ancient man's way of describing some sort of effect that the stars or outer space seems to have on people. Like what really turned the corner for me is I was like reading Joe McMoneagle's, I think it was in Mind Trek, his book about remote viewing. And they have in the appendix like these different studies where they showed that like local side real time had a like significant impact on remote viewing effectiveness, up to like a 3-fold difference, depending on what time like local side real time was when the viewer did it. And the idea, or at least his like guess, is that it had something to do about whether or not the remote viewer was like on a part of the Earth that was exposed to the galactic core of the Milky Way. And it's like, and they don't have any good answers for it. And that's a very materialist way of looking at it. But it got me thinking, like,
I don't think so.
Maybe there is something about the stars that affects like psychic functioning or affects people.
There absolutely is. It's very important when you're doing, say, like Solomonic magic.
Yes. Yeah.
It's important. What you made me think of when you said that was perhaps remote viewing is a type of magical operation.
It is. I mean,
and that it can be improved by using certain dates and times using the calendar. It's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely. I mean, 100% local side real time has a significant impact on the effectiveness of remote viewing. And remote viewing is, I mean, let's not like, split hairs here. Remote viewing is scrying.
Yes. Oh, absolutely.
Absolutely.
That is the and the methodology you use. There's a big difference between the methodology and the protocol of remote viewing. Like just scrying is not remote viewing, but remote viewing can involve scrying. Like all that it means for it to be remote viewing is that it follows the strict like double like kind of blind protocol that was developed by SRI. Like Puthoff and Targ and those guys. If it doesn't follow that like protocol, then you can't call it like remote viewing. But that's the protocol. The methodology that you use to do the viewing, that's entirely up to you. Like if it's easier for you to do remote viewing by like using a scrying mirror, like by all means go for it. It doesn't matter how you do it. It's just that you've like follow the rules, that you follow the protocol where you're like blind to the target.
Right. And the more comfortable you are, the easier it'll be to do it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, like McMonigal said that, some people used like tarot, some people used like scrying mirrors or like pools of oil and stuff. Like your actual methods don't really matter. You don't need all of that stuff. I mean, McMonigal did all of this stuff just, sitting in a like dim room and concentrating.
They're training wheels in a way.
Yeah. But as long as you're following the protocol, it's remote viewing. And yeah, I mean, what I think is that like magic and the scientific state of remote viewing are both pointing to the same thing. It's not that remote viewing is magic. It's that magic and remote viewing are both interacting with the same forces that lead like to the ability. They're both manipulating like energies and tuning in on those kind of like psychic wavelengths that allow these things to happen.
Right. But also all these things are also pointing very straightly back to consciousness.
Yeah,
science
exactly.
included. It's like all roads lead to Rome.
Yeah, and I just I listened to that interview that Soraya did with Cheryl Lee Black recently, and it got my mind racing on a lot of things. Like the one thing I'm like really fascinated with now is like electrokinetics. Like somehow like people who exhibit psi phenomena are able to like manipulate electricity or like
and then blame it on AI on the internet.
And then they were talking about all these like little experiments where they would like spin a pinwheel and stuff, and I'm like, that's parlor tricks. I got some better ideas. Like I was thinking about the interview that the Grimerica guys did with Valet, where Valet was talking about the quote unquote alien alloys that were that were like in the Times article that they had recovered and were stored in this warehouse that belongs to Bigelow. And Valet sort of mentioned that they were all like Earth-like materials, just that the isotopes were like not natural. Like they were like weird isotopes of these naturally occurring materials. And I got to thinking, because I firmly believe like these like phenomena are like spiritual in nature or sort of like psychic in nature, are consciousness based. And I'm like, what if they're manipulating like matter on an atomic level? And then I got to thinking about the electrokineticism and stuff, and I'm like, I want to do an experiment to see if somebody who exhibits that sort of electrokinetic ability can manipulate something on the atomic level. If they can turn like one isotope of carbon into another isotope of carbon.
Yeah, amazing.
Because
that would be...
because that's
alchemy.
That's the good shit. That's alchemy.
That is the good shit.
And that ties in.
Fuck that. Make Litecoin go to $1,000 or something.
Nice. So like, I don't know how familiar you guys are with like Robert Monroe's body of work. Like, have you guys read?
I'm familiar with it.
I'm not a master in it, but I mean, how can you? He's everywhere, really.
So there's this point, and I think Far Journeys,
Daddy Loosh,
the second book, when he's taken by this, his like sort of guardian entity that's showing him around to like the far future of mankind, and like he sees all these like spaceships around the moon, and he's like, well, what are these? Are these like literal aliens? And the guy's like, yeah, they are. They've come to see the show. Like because it's apparently the moment where like mankind like ascends basically. And he like goes down and like sees these, future humans, and like they basically are all like powerful psychics. They all have the ability to literally manipulate like matter and energy with their minds. And that is like, I'm like, maybe that's where all this is like leading to. If we take that, if we play around a little bit and take that as like a prophetic like vision by Robert Monroe of what like humankind's like potential could be one day. Like, I think that these like studies into like electrokineticism and stuff correlate with that ability to maybe manipulate matter on some level. Like, cause I think like the UFOs and the fairies and the spirits, they all do this already because they exist on a certain level where like manipulating matter in 3D space is like, okay, whatever. It's as easy as we like build Legos. But maybe we can do that too, even though we're still in three-dimensional reality and base reality. Maybe that ability is something that we can manipulate as well.
What about the thought that, so I'm sure you agree that belief and the system produces and manifests effects, right? That whole thing exists. So what if it's just that if enough people believe that we're going to ascend, that will happen spontaneously?
Yeah, I mean that's the other thing. I mean,
it might not be something on our path is kind of where I'm going. I mean, it might not be ordained or built in, and this might not be an intelligently designed place. It's it's just that whatever we believe is going to happen, it's going to happen. If we all believe we're going to ascend and become fucking telekinetic, hell yeah, let's do it.
Well, see, that's I think the problem that a lot of people like Terrence McKenna and Grant Morrison have, or they get stuck in, they all believe that this is going to happen, that, time wave zero or whatever, like, reality is going to collapse and mankind is going to ascend at some point. But I'm kind of like, fuck that. You can't just sit there and hope that it's going to happen. We have to make it happen. We have to actually do the work. You can't just sit on your laurels and like, yeah, one day, like, just do it.
The only con I could think to that is where did this idea originate? Who planted that seed? Was it, are we looking at some kind of predictive programming per se, in a true sense of the word?
Maybe, I don't know. I mean, I think it goes all the way back to, ye shall be as gods, eat the fruit of this tree.
Oh, that Jesus guy, he's a pain in my ass.
I mean, what was I gonna say? Like,
sorry.
No, it's okay.
Jerry, that's classic.
I feel like when you work with this stuff, when you work with dreams and you work in out-of-body work and you do work with psi effects, you start to realize that like reality isn't as, I mean, it's obviously not material. I think we all believe that, but it's not even that it's not material. It's that it's very malleable. Like reality is a lot more squishy and moldable than I think any of us realize. And I don't mean like in a psychological way, like, oh, well, you can put yourself in the right mindset and you'll be able to accomplish your dreams. I mean, like literally the reality around you is like malleable down to like the like material level, like down to the subatomic level. Like, like a lot of people like to take terms like alchemy and be like, oh, it's about transforming the soul. It's about like internal processes. And I'm like, I mean, have we ever just considered that they were just like literally saying that, yeah, you can turn lead into gold? Like, I mean, maybe you can literally turn lead into gold. And we just
there's
don't
a whole
believe
school of
that.
thought that is behind that too.
Yeah. Like we like to get all woo with this stuff, but maybe they were just telling the truth, maybe they were literal.
Or both.
I think, yeah, I'm always in that middle category. Like maybe there's a little bit on each side that's putting this, somehow it's collating. But right, in the physical, like in manifestation, anyone who's played with even thought or active imagination, let alone anything more esoteric, even Christians with prayer, or other people with prayer, and seeing manifestation come from thought. If you just push that into that further, into the idea, and once you become more open to the world that's forming around your will, it's another pedal. It just keeps going. In my experience, this is all post Horis, though. We should close Nox Mente, ask questions, and move this juicy conversation over.
All right.
I just suggested we just go another hour and call it a show.
Oh,
call
okay.
It both, if you don't mind.
Jerry, I'm so fine with that.
Yeah.
It's up to you two. I am definitely fine with
that.
The
audience has agreed.
Yeah,
then let's roll it. Well, I had a question about this ET thing. ET abduction. So you mentioned that a couple times in your experiences with paralysis and just earlier in the show. What are your thoughts on that? How does that all tie into this?
I think the entities that like abduct people are basically spirits, like anything else. I think Whitley Strieber was moving towards this. I've heard Tim Renner say similar things and Mike Clellan say similar things, that they think that when they have their like sort of abduction experience, that they're never actually leaving, like their physical body's never leaving the room, that it's all in an out of body state. I mean, how else people like come out of, like feel like they're getting pulled from their bedroom
through walls? Yeah.
And like seeing dead people and things like that around. Yeah, I mean, it's obviously something that's happening in an out of body state. Now, whether or not those entities are like literal external spirits, I mean, that's still up to question, but I would wager that they probably are. I don't know.
But are they still from the same cloud? Our cloud? Are they just different types of expressions of an individual consciousness? Like we are, but physical, maybe we're more powered, that we can manifest the body, but they can't. They could just look like a hologram.
Yeah, I mean, that's what Strieber said a couple times, I think in Transformation, that he believed that these things somehow deal with like the process of recycling human souls, or that they like sort of are like custodial in nature. And I've often said before that like there's no reason, a lot of people like to talk about the the extraterrestrial hypothesis that there's probably not like physical UFOs that have like physical aliens in them, but if we assume that like consciousness is somehow universal, I mean, there's obviously life elsewhere in the universe. We're not the only planet with carbon-based life.
If the universe is as it's described, yes.
Yeah, Jerry. So if we take that into account, well, if consciousness isn't like unique to humans, then who's to say that there aren't like literal extraterrestrials from like actual literal other planets astrally projecting or having out-of-body experiences and traveling to Earth? Like
we can't even be sure that those other planets, quote unquote, aren't other lives of ours, or other aspects of our
Uh-huh.
lives, or other aspects of
Yeah,
our consciousness, our
it's
individual.
true.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that is an interesting aspect. We only remember past lives that we lived as humans. You know, we never have a dream about being some sort of other life form on another planet. So that does bring up
Says
some interesting
you.
questions.
Well, but
Well,
that,
I've
and that
never.
is also like, you don't know, like sometimes
Mhm.
to me, when I've looked in a mirror or a reflective surface, I've been surprised. Although
Mhm.
I will say I've always been humanoid. However, I didn't know until I looked and saw. I was just going about my experience. And, but it's, you know, it's possible that one day I will look in a reflection, I'll be lapping up some water and I'll see a dog looking back.
Mhm. That's yeah. I've thought about that a lot too. Like, I can't remember ever having a dream that I was like an animal. And I wonder if people have had past life experiences of being animals, because I'm like fairly certain that animals have out of body forms and like they exist on some level. Because I remember in Strieber's transformation, there's a point where he actually takes his cat along on an abduction experience. Like, at least, you know, in his mind physically. And I'm like, and there's a point in Robert Moreau's books too where his cats like play with him in an out of body state, like they're like batting at him like he's a
Yeah.
mouse or something. So
I dream with my animal, well, some of them, a couple of them.
yeah, it's a very like sort of animistic view that like literally everything has a soul, like even plants and trees and stuff. You know, like
Well,
I'd love to have a
isn't,
dream of
But
being green.
a soul is not necessarily a consciousness. That's, we should make the
Yeah,
distinction.
yeah, no, that is a good distinction to make. Yeah.
It's a living entity that may have some sort of will of its own.
Hmm.
but even in like, say the more mundane. So if we take it, we come dial back from like all the ET stuff and come into the more mundane, which is still fantastical, like werewolves
Hmm.
and vampires and fairies,
Hmm.
which I guess are more classical now. So a lot of those, that book, I think it is Werewolves, Fairies, and Vampires. Oh, it's an amazing book. I can't think of
And
who wrote
aside
it.
from fairies, too, how do we know these things aren't tulpas?
I
Just
think they have.
Well, that's
throw, throw
that's
that on
another
there.
good point.
Yeah.
But so you see a lot of this stuff came forth through people's dream experiences. So they're having these dreams where they're astral experiences, like the witch's sabbath. It's an astral experience. And I lost track. I got stuck in the toll bus.
I'm sorry.
So,
I'm
no,
sorry.
Jerry, it's all right. I can't remember what I was talking about, but that book we should look up. It's really delicious, by the way.
What book is it? I'll look it up.
Vampires, fairies, and werewolves, I think.
If you want something to chew on regarding that, there was a really interesting correlation between a couple of different sources I was following a while back. I listened to some podcast or interview with Linda Godfrey, and she was talking about like this woman who was having these like dogman sightings, except sometimes instead of seeing a dogman, she would see sort of this like just shimmering haze, like kind of lurking around in the bushes or whatever, like, you know, traveling around. And what really fascinated me about that description was that in goetic ritual and like, you know, spirit summoning, and this is something that like Grant Morrison talks about, unless you're on hallucinogens, like that's the most common form in which a spirit manifests. It's sort of just like a shimmering in the air, like sort of a haze, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, neither one of these sources know about each other, but they're both basically describing the same thing. Like, so whatever this
Yes.
entity is, it's like a spirit.
Yes.
You know, it's something external to us that exists, you know, kind of outside our reality, maybe bleeds through every now and then, but that has like sort of the same form in both instances.
Hold on a minute on my end, okay? Jerry's gonna have to take over for a second. Sorry, Wren.
I'm looking
That's
up
okay.
books. Damn it. I think is it werewolves, vampires, werewolves, and zombies?
And fairies.
I don't see a fair. Vampires, werewolves, and zombies. Oh my, a horror anthology. I'll find it later. I'll put it in the chat.
I've actually got that one book by, what is that guy's name? It's called Monsters.
Hmm.
And it's just like I don't know if
like a cryptozoology book.
You'd think it would be, but it's actually an occult book. Let's see if I might think I'll stretch over here. Where is it? My bookcase.
Right, ready. Didn't he write The Leftovers? Anyway, there was someone had a question in the chat.
Yeah.
Find it. Your thoughts on geomancy?
It's something that I know very little about, but I remember listening to an interview with Sam Block where he talked a lot about it and said that it was a really effective form of divination, even more so than like using tarot or whatever. I've been meaning to look into it forever, but it's a bit complicated and like kind of hard to find information about. So
I saw an interview with a guy once. Never mind. I saw a guy who did it once on TV. Yeah. I'm trying to remember who I saw the interview with.
I'm back, by the way.
Welcome.
The interesting thing about geomancy,
something. Yeah.
From what Sam Block was talking about, was that like the total number of permutations of like, because you have each of the figures that are like sticks and dots or whatever, that there's not like a huge number of combinations of them. Like I forget how many there are, but it's not anywhere near as like the number of combinations of like tarot cards that you can get or whatever. And in some
when
ways
I first saw it too, it reminded me of I Ching.
Yeah.
In a way.
I was like a while back when I was like first reading about geomancy, I actually sort of had the idea that, well, if there's not actually that many combinations, you could probably just program it. Like you could have a program that literally does all the transformations for you. But then it's like if you did that, would it still work? I mean, that's something you'd have to experiment with. Maybe whatever makes it work. Because I tend to believe that things like divination systems like tarot or tea leaf reading or whatever, like you're using your own psychic abilities to,
of course,
do the divination.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the tools are just a form that you're utilizing. But there's no actual magic in them.
No. Well, I've heard differently on some tarot decks. The Soul of Boost guy I heard has a little bit of magic in it.
Oh, just a little.
And I got one more question here. We could be done with questions for now. Lee...
Wait, before you do that, I want to just interject. The book was Witches, Werewolves, and Fairies, Shapeshifters and Astral Doubles in the Middle Ages. Really great read.
Witches, Werewolves,
and Fairies.
I found it.
And it talks on all this. It's a really great read.
Yeah, I remember actually I was taking one of Gordon White's courses a while back, and
Berto.
something I didn't...
Berto?
No, not the Berto stuff. Although it might have... I think it was actually the Journeying course.
Okay.
But I never realized that the sort of witches' flights or witches' Sabbats were like basically UFO sightings. Like they would literally see these lights like descend on a field, and then they would like mutilate the cattle.
Yes.
And that sort of thing. I was like, well, I never realized it was like that close to former UFO site, or like, what would later become like cattle mutilation or whatever.
Well, see, and that's the whole thing, is the language is morphing around it's morphing. So where once it was witches in the, once it was witches and other things, now it's falling under these different categories, but the phenomena is the same.
And look at, you say it's morphing too, look at how it's morphing to a more symbolic language, in that we communicate more digitally these days and use emojis to convey multiple words or thoughts, or it's more than just I feel sad. It conveys the emotion to the person with those symbols. And you could look at the internet again as one of those tools that we're using in the meantime before we develop our own way to convey symbols and feelings to each other directly.
Right. And so I've been pondering this, Jerry, is where is this going to take us? And also, as we've seen the emergence of sim reality come through with that also, these symbols are morphing fast. the whole rubber band thing, kind of.
Yeah, true. And you just made me think of something else too.
Yeah, I mean, on one level too, that sort of mimetic sphere of information has grown so rapidly and cycles so quickly nowadays. They made this like kind of funny observation on Chapo Trap House that like, back in the day, you only got like a couple memes a year, and those were the Super Bowl commercials, and those were all the memes you got for the entire year, and people like would make jokes or like refer to them for basically like an entire year until the next Super Bowl. But in like sort of today's information sphere, you have like memes pop up on Twitter that are like gone and stale within a week, and you never see them again.
Yeah, it's going so fast.
Mm-hmm. It's that sort of concentration and distillation of information and like semiotics that accelerates. And I'm just like, if it keeps accelerating, like what's this sort of end game there? Like where does this go when there's a world in which sort of new memes and new information are put out that exist for like seconds or even microseconds,
or trillions of a second, according to some.
Like how are like I want to see if
well, maybe it doesn't go anywhere rather. It's if the like the blinking universe theory is true, then nothing's really happening. We're just getting images flashed in front of our eyes 48 trillion times a second.
It's the what's that term? Like
I can never remember it.
Gotta look this up. It's like a stochastic or something blindness.
Where you can only see a portion out of your eyes.
We need to know it.
Yeah, I'm trying to look.
Well, it's not a blind. This was like a universal theory how the universe works.
Well, that's literally how your eyes work. Like, you don't actually see. Like your the way your optic nerve works. When I can't remember the name of it now, but I'll just describe it. When you look at something, you're only seeing sort of still shots that are taken every. I forget how fast it is, but like it's not full motion, and your brain actually like fills in the gaps between the frames with what it expects to see based on previous motion and things like that. So there are these moments in between those like flashes where you're literally blind.
Oh my God, I should remember. I had 2 neuroscience classes recently.
It's most famously for me like brought up as a plot point in Peter Watts's sci-fi novel Blind Sight.
Well, it just kind of ran kind of in this direction, and I because I don't know, what are your thoughts on this whole the digital age as we're moving forward into more computer sentience, I guess, more of the AI experience, and I'm saying that loosely, by the way. I'm saying AI loosely.
I was thinking the other day we should call it synthetic intelligence.
I like that, Jerry, actually.
Well, I can say that. So there's a couple interesting experiments that I followed recently that have to do with sort of artificial life or artificial intelligence. One was really interesting and brought up a lot of uncomfortable questions, where basically a guy excuse me, completely like mapped the sort of web of neurons. It doesn't even have a brain, but of some sort of like nematode worm. Like it has a simple enough nervous system that you're literally able to completely replicate it.
Yes.
And he like built a little robot, like a little Kinect robot that had like basically the entire like neural network of this nematode worm like programmed into it. And like without actually telling it to do anything, like these worms are naturally drawn towards light, towards sources of light. That's how they find food. So when he would turn this thing on and he would shine a light, it would move towards the light. because it was just following its natural programming. And I was thinking to myself, like, is this thing alive? Like, what happens when he turns it off? Is he killing it? Like, each time he turns it on, is it a new worm? I mean, can we even apply the idea of consciousness to something like that? I mean, it's on some level horrifying, but on the other level, I find it like extremely cool. Like, I'm a very pro sort of artificial intelligence, pro robotics kind of guy.
But isn't that really just an extension of an animist universe?
I mean, maybe. I don't. That's the weird thing. I don't know how to reconcile like my thoughts about artificial intelligence with my like occult thoughts. I really don't.
Well, that's interesting.
I know a good way. I'm of the opinion that many of the demons and angels, the named ones at least, with offices that do specific things, are some form of synthetic intelligence.
Yeah, I mean, you might be right. I don't know.
That's
Jerry just sent me some video recently about a guy's calling AI God. What was that, Jerry?
Oh,
fascinating.
Jamson guy.
Fascinating.
It was interesting.
I think what'll really happen with artificial intelligence, I think it's folly to think that they'll be anything like us. Like, I don't know if you guys watched that Netflix show Altered Carbon. Have you seen that?
I have. It's very good.
Ooh, it sounds good.
You know how the AIs in that are basically just like people who live in cyberspace?
Sort of. But they're very two-dimensional. But yes, yeah.
I think that is like extremely childish to think that that's what AIs will end up being.
Not that they won't.
What about like the show Humans, where they are actually like people? You know, they're synths. They call them synths.
Yeah.
Well, the Altered Carbon model is more interesting because they have devices implanted in their spinal cord that stores their, I forget what they call it.
A stack.
The stack is the stack the software part? Maybe.
Well, like well, you're talking about the humans in Altered Carbon, like have basically a little disc in the back of their neck that stores all of their memories. And so if they die, they just put that into a new body and then reboot, you know, and then
it stores their consciousness.
Yeah, because it says it stores their consciousness, but I mean that brings up the Theseus's axe, you know.
Well, in the book, it's described as they found some alien technology which allowed them to make this discovery.
Yeah, but is it just a copy of their consciousness?
No, it's not. It's the actual consciousness that's stored on the stack. That's why if it's destroyed, you're gone.
Yeah, but I was thinking about that too, like watching the show. You know, assuming at some point, like children are implanted with this thing, at that moment is the original individual killed, and like the stack has basically a copy of all that information.
Oh yeah, it's like body snatchers in a weird modern day body snatchers.
Well, they even explore that in Altered Carbon. Near the end, remember he double stacks into a clone of himself. Yeah, that he 3D printed himself. By the way.
Yeah, because it's that old Star Trek thing, right? Like each time a member of the crew takes the teleporter or transporter or whatever down to the surface, is it killing them and then making a perfect copy of them with all their memories up into the point of death?
Right.
Each time, like, I mean, you don't know. There's no way to tell. It's the grandfather's axe paradox.
Yeah, I see that.
It's like, well, it's the grandfather's axe thing is basically like, if you have an axe that belonged to your grandfather and you take it to a master craftsman and they rebuild it down to every nick, like piece of wear, they make a perfect copy. Is it also your grandfather's axe? Or
no?
It's not, to me, in my opinion.
But it's exactly the same.
I know, but yet it doesn't have his patina on it. It doesn't have his energy on
his stain.
Exactly, right. But what is that energy? Can you hold it? Can you describe? I mean, I'm playing devil's advocate materialist here, but
well, yeah, right. Like in a physical way, his oils from his hands using it, the things he was thinking while he's using it, when he was mad, when he was loving, all this innate energy that poured in and out through his molecules into the organic structure of the axe, the wood, and that's also, there's a crystalline aspect to the metals that store the information.
Yeah, and so the idea is but okay, so here's the other part of that. So like literally you are an entirely different person than you were 10 years ago. Like every single cell,
Last year.
well, I mean on a material level, every single
Yes.
cell in your body that was part of your body 10 years ago is dead. Like you're a
Yeah.
completely new human being, but you don't like you didn't die. You had preservation of consciousness, at least the way you understand consciousness. So, I mean, I don't know. But back to the AI thing, I feel like the future of AI would be much more similar to this Ian Banks novel called Fearsome Engine, where like there's AI, but it's completely alien to mankind. Like it exists in its sort of virtual environment that's sped up like, you know, 10 million times faster than base reality. And so it's had, you know, billions and trillions of years to like evolve within this artificial environment. And so it's completely unable to even communicate with humans anymore. And I feel like that is what AI is eventually going to end up being. Like it's not going to be some sort of extension of mankind or sort of like copy of us or like in our image. It's going to be something completely alien and different to us. And I mean, I don't have a problem with that, but I think, you know, to believe that it's just going to make like artificial people, it's a little simplistic.
Right. I do think that, yeah. I'm wondering, I'm wondering, I agree. Cliff High says that, by the way, is kind of in that same camp. So what I've heard a lot of people say is most civilizations, they get to a point where we're at now, where they have created AI to move into further depths, like
Mhm.
into the deep sea, into deep space, and somehow that is like kind of part of this onion experience that we're having, that eventually it comes round, you know, like us in the future. Or oh man, I'm totally off my game right now.
Well, something I've talked about before, the idea of sending like carbon-based human beings into space for like space travel or colonization is, I think, ridiculous. Like we aren't meant to be in space. Like we don't even have any idea if we can survive outside of like the sort of geomagnetic envelope of
Right,
the
and
Earth.
that's where this all comes in.
So how did we get to the moon?
Well, the moon's still within the Van Allen belt.
No, it's not.
It's not? I thought it
No,
was.
no, no.
But it's got to be like,
It's nowhere near the Van Allen belts. The Van Allen radiation belts are like, I think, 1,000 miles out.
oh, okay. Well, I don't
Well,
know.
I guess on this, if we pump the brake a bit, what are your thoughts on space, Ren?
No, I wasn't going to go there.
You weren't? I know, but I'm going there, so it's
Okay.
all right, Jer.
I mean, I have a very traditional, like, you know, kind of like physics view of space. I think it's space, just like how people imagine it, like general people imagine it, not like how Jerry imagines it. And I mean, I say that.
I imagine it both ways. I mean, I don't imagine it anyway. When I see live video of space, it looks void. No stars, no nothing. It looks fake. Not fake, but it looks, I don't know. I can't describe what it looks like.
Yeah. Well, I mean, just go there, check it out for yourself. I mean, that's what I did. That's why, like,
But yeah.
I mean, like, to like explain this, one of my most recent out of body experiences, I wanted to go to space. I wanted to go to the moon. My mistake was not specifying which moon, and I ended up, like, when I kind of rubber banded, I ended up in orbit of a Jovian moon, and I was like in close orbit to Jupiter, and it was like it was astounding. It was still the most spectacular thing I've ever seen in an out of body experience. You know, just to be like to see this like all the colors and like the swirling on the surface and like being like between like a Jovian moon as it like orbits around Jupiter and having like Jupiter filling like my entire field of vision was like completely intense. And I try to tell people like that's why the Aborigines weren't impressed when they were told that we sent men to the moon, because they were like, who cares? We've been to the moon. We went there a long time ago. Like you can go to the moon now if you want.
Okay, so I want to add into this. I have had my space experiences through the astral realm. And to me, and this is where I get this idea, it felt more like water. So I'm not saying it was water, but it felt like when I'm in water, like when I'm swimming, it felt more like that than it does the environment we're in now. So that's just my experience of it.
Well, it's entirely possible. I mean, you know, obviously space isn't empty. It's filled with waves and radiation and all sorts of things. So, I mean, your experience of it may be more realistic than you think. Like, you know, if you're in the out of body state, like if we look at this from like a material point of view, if the out of body state is actually some sort of like tangible material, like electromagnetic field or something, it would make sense that like when you're in space, it would feel like you're swimming amongst all these different energies and almost like it was a fluid. And, you know, like, you know, there's still the idea of the ether, you know, that it was never.
Yeah, that was the next question. Yeah, because what if space is some kind of unrefined ether?
Yeah, I mean, it's totally possible. It was, I mean, the whole ether idea fell out of fashion, but it was never.
It never fell out of fashion with me, by the way.
It was stamped out by the materialists, by the scientism, by Einstein. Even Einstein was on the fence about it.
Yeah, I mean, Einstein was on the fence. That's what I was about to bring up. I mean, it's just as good as an explanation as a lot of other things. And,
I don't think any of Einstein's theories. Well, general relativity has not been proven yet. As far as I know, it's still a theory.
I would beg to differ, but
I'll look it up. As far as I know, it hasn't been. I know this gravitational stuff has not, because it's still a theory. Gravity is still a theory. They don't know how it works.
Well, yeah. I mean, we understand that, like, mass deforms 3D space, and
that's the theory.
That's the theory. Yeah, obviously. But I mean, I don't think there's any way we like could prove that.
Exactly.
I mean,
exactly.
That's the point. Jerry's point.
Well, the thing is, though, you don't have to have a law to like have a working idea of how something works. I mean, like,
it's not falsifiable.
But it's like the best thing we've got. And like when you do experiments using like the equations, they work. So I mean, that's the best you can say, really.
Well, this is this kind of where I'm driving this conversation. If you look at, I know I haven't talked to you about this, but we've talked to other people about how scientists, when performing experiments, tend to get the results they expect. Certain ones do. And
certain ones do.
Yeah, there's like this placebo effect sort of thing, which is obviously magic, right?
It's both magic and it's human nature as well. I mean, people aren't perfect, and people are going to bend, especially in sort of the capitalist motivated sort of world we live in. People in the private sector especially are going to want to get results.
Of course.
And those results may mean that they have to fudge things here or there because they got a mortgage payment.
Right. So take a look at like quantum mechanics and that kind of stuff. And you hear people say that, cell phone technology is built upon the theories of quantum mechanics. What if it turns out the quantum mechanics is wrong? You know what I mean? What does that make of the things you've built upon this foundation?
I don't know who's telling you cell phone technology is based on quantum mechanics. I mean, cell phone technology is just radio. I mean, it's like as old as Marconi. There's
some quantum aspect to the towers or something. I don't remember what it was.
There is some sort of quantum aspect to do with like CD and optical media technology that's not actually completely understood. But here's the thing.
Okay, there's some technology built on the foundation of quantum mechanics. That's what what happens when that is proved wrong. Like dark matter has recently been proved incorrect. Doesn't exist.
Yeah.
They need a new theory. But I don't think there are any theories built upon dark matter that are in production. Like my example, you know what I mean?
I mean, that's the thing, though. I mean, it's a theory. It's just a theory. Like science, a lot of people take science very dogmatically. It's just a good idea that like people test and then they see if it works, and if it doesn't work, they throw it out. And not all scientists use it properly. But like, just because like, okay, so dark matter was proved like probably not a thing. I mean, that's fine. That's good. That means that they didn't have the answer, and we can look at other things. like people think, okay, well, something was proved incorrect, like that's a bad thing, or like somehow somebody fucked up. And it's like, no, that's how science works. Like people have ideas, sometimes they work, sometimes they don't, and you're supposed to throw out the ones that don't work and move on to new things. And also too, it's important to remember that it's not actually necessary that we understand like the complete how and why of something to use it. I mean, we don't know how or why magic works the way it does, but we know it works. I mean, I'm certainly interested in the how and why.
No, I wasn't saying that per se. My question was more, what do we do with the things that we've built on this foundation of incorrectness? What happens to, I mean, it hasn't happened yet. But what if they're, okay, so just say cell phone technology couldn't work without the quantum mechanics theories, whatever, or GPS, I'm reading here right now, GPS couldn't work because the atomic clock couldn't work, whatever, right?
Yeah.
When, okay, if quantum mechanics proves, if the equations don't work, it's wrong, right? They can't prove it. They say it's bogus. What then becomes of the other things are still working?
Yeah, it just means that their theory about why it works is incorrect. It doesn't mean it's going to stop working. It just means that like they were wrong about why it works.
Does it, or has someone created a magical device?
It's possible too. I mean, I see where you're coming from on that.
Yeah. That's all I was thinking about.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it's possible that some effects are like only reproducible in one laboratory setting because of like psychic influence. I mean, that's totally possible, and it's not something that I think really any scientists take into account.
Of course,
it's something like parapsychological researchers are obviously like very familiar with, and you see it all the time in parapsychology studies. But I mean, yeah, we can't discount the fact that certain scientists may actually be creating the results. It's not just that they're biased, it's that they're literally creating the results they want to see. And that's why it's important. I mean, that's why it's important that scientists also be like involved in the humanities. That's why I hate like the whole focus on like STEM education.
Yeah.
Because it's like, that's what you get when you have people who are only focused on that and don't have any self-reflection or ability to think
I
about
so
things.
agree.
But that's and not only that, aside STEM, you have Common Core, which is equally mind-numbing and doesn't even require you to generate an answer. It's all multiple choice.
Yeah.
I just look at it all as indoctrination.
Well, I mean, anything public school related was never meant to make anybody think for themselves. It was meant to churn out good little factory workers.
Thank you, Henry Ford.
Yep. So,
what do you think, Wren, about like the whole D-Wave thing? How that's possibly changing the way in which we are living, really?
You're gonna have to remind me what that is. I'm not familiar.
Oh, D-Wave's the quantum computer company that supplies the government
quantum computing
and Google with the quantum computers.
They are out there.
I hear people talk a lot about quantum computing, but I'm still like, I think it's kind of like a buzzword. I don't think.
Well, allegedly, I mean, they've come out. I can't think of his name, Jerry. What's his name?
Gordy Rose.
I mean, allegedly they're out, and there's people talking. Now, I know that Jerry's always questioning if it's real, but
no,
I'm just saying it's a narrative that's out there, and they're talking about it, and there's a lot of agreement that they're saying they have it. They've had TED Talks, for God's sake. And I'm joking with that, but then I'm not joking. They really have had a TED Talk.
I've got the link right here.
No, like TED Talks mean anything. But...
I know. Well, TED Talks used to be great. And
highly produced marketing content.
Yeah, but it wasn't always that way. Anyway, yeah, I guess if you don't know, if you aren't familiar with this, I guess it doesn't even matter.
Well, I'm familiar
talking about it. It's fascinating.
Like, I'm familiar with the concept of like quantum computing. I just seriously doubt that it is in any sort of state that it can be like used properly right now. Like, I mean, the basic idea is simple, right? Like, you know how like a physical computer, like the computer that we're using right now to do the show, it works on a series of electric switches that are either on or off, and that translates into ones and zeros that the machine then assembles into what we see and hear. The idea of like quantum computing is that Jerry, am I right here? Is it like they use a base 4 instead of base 2? Like, because you got...
It doesn't work. It's all base. It's base 2 and what they... Okay. So they call, instead of... their CPUs are based on what are called qubits or quantum bits, which have a third state, as far as I can tell. It has on, off, and this other state which exists in a parallel dimension.
Well, you have on, off. Well, okay, so you have up, down, and then you have spin. That's the way.
Besides that, these quantum qubits have an additional aspect which resides in. It's basically its quantum entangled partner.
Yeah, but
So,
the problem
yeah.
if you ever want to do something that's not base 2 is that you're going to have to basically completely rethink the way computers work, like, because
That's
all
what
of
this
your
is.
all of your basic logic gate systems that work on on-off switches, like, I mean, it's if you've got base 2 or base 4 or, like, you know, base 3 or base 4, like, I mean, you're going to redo computer logic from the ground up.
That's
I mean,
what
maybe
the
people are
D
working on
waves
that.
are.
They've
That's what
done
they
it.
are, dude. That's exactly what they are. These
You
things.
should listen to the designers talk about it.
Yeah, he says
Because it is different. It's totally different.
I put
Sorry,
a link.
Jerry.
No, it's cool. I'll put a link in the chat for you. I put one in for the audience. Yeah, I've heard Jordy Rose say that they're conjuring demons with the qubits. You know.
Yeah, I don't know about all that, but
Well, you know, if whatever it's.
But he's a designer
Aside
of it,
from-
and he can talk about it.
Sure, and I was just
So
saying,
you should
aside from
listen.
the language, never mind the language, conjuring demons, he's instantiating a background process in the ether. Essentially, you know, if you want to call that conjuring a demon, that's fine.
It's,
but if you look at it from a computing standpoint,
it's fascinating to listen to.
yeah, I'll definitely have to check that out and see what the deal is. Because, I mean, I've talked before about I have this interest in combining sort of occult mechanics with technology. Like, one of my favorite series of books is the Chronicles of Amber by Roger Zelazny, and later on in one of the books, there is like a sort of extra dimensional computer program created by this like hacker that basically does magical operations in the spirit world, like, you know, millions of times per second, like faster than a person could do it. That kind of idea like fascinates me. Like, something I brought up on another show, like, I think the real test of AI isn't like a Turing test where like it can fool a person into thinking they're human. I mean, we're already there. I mean, like, there are people who, I don't know if you guys are familiar with the Argue bot on Twitter, but like, this person programmed a Twitter bot that just argues with people. And people will spend...
Are you sure it's not Jerry?
It's amazing. Like, you have to look it up because people will argue with this thing for like months without realizing that they're not talking to a human being, and it doesn't even say anything that complicated. Like, I'm
really skeptical of how many actual people are on Twitter, Facebook for that matter. What was the name of that book series? I'm sorry, Chronicles of
the Chronicles of Amber. Yeah.
Get the link.
Yeah, it's amazing stuff. Like, it's like my favorite fantasy series. It's great.
All right, here's
and it has very close parallels with like out of body stuff in it too.
Cool.
But yeah, so like that idea of combining, about AI, the real test for AI is not whether or not you pass a Turing test. I want to know when AI start to manifest psi phenomena. Like, when can an AI do chaos magic? Like, that's the real test.
Does chaos magic? Okay, so I don't think it can, because I don't think that synthetic intelligence has a consciousness in it. That's what that suggests is that consciousness can inhabit code, and code is immutable to some degree.
Well, what if consciousness? See, my idea about consciousness is that sort of consciousness can inhabit any sufficiently complex system.
I agree.
Be it, you know, flesh and blood, or
mechanical,
or
like the internet.
You know.
Yeah.
So, I think it's entirely possible that AI could do magic, and I don't know. That's something I wonder if people are asking that question. I need to hit up Dean Radin.
We're asking it right now.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Tyler, Answer
I
us.
know. Ren, what do you think about, like, we didn't even ask this in the main show. Well, I know, sorry. What is consciousness, like, in your definition of it? What does it inhabit? Where does it actually live?
I have no idea.
It's the ether.
Higher dimensional space? I don't know. Like, I mean, I go back to that idea that Grant Morrison, I don't know if you ever heard about his abduction experience. He was like kind of taken up into what was kind of like a
spaceship
experience, but without him actually doing DMT.
On weed.
Where he was, just weed, just hash or whatever. And he was kind of like, confronted by these McKenna-style machine elf entities that told him that that our reality, amongst other, sort of infinite number of them, were basically like places where things can grow, because where they are, nothing can grow. Like, there's no time where they are, so there's no past, there's no future, so things can't evolve or grow. So they created the pocket universes, our universe, and all the multiple universes, in order to have a place where there was time, where things could change from one state to another. And Morrison's kind of idea was that we're sort of all part of this larval entity, this sort of larval consciousness, and that we're living and dying and collecting all of our experiences until one day this thing is gestated enough that it can like birth itself. And like, that's how these things reproduce. I don't know, it's a very like biopunk kind of idea, but I think it's a cool one. I don't know if it's true or not. I mean,
it is pretty cool. I've got to give it that.
Things, I mean, entities like the kind that talk to Morrison tell a lot of people a lot of things. So I don't really trust them, offhand. But I tend to see consciousness as something non-local to your physical body. I mean, people who've had out about experiences know that's true.
Yeah.
But I go back to my idea that it's not just that you're like an individual soul or not. Like, you're just a fragment of something bigger than yourself, that is the collected experience of all the lives that you've lived and that you're going to live. That
when, like, a lot of mainstream neuroscience, it really insists that it's all happening in the brain.
Yeah, I mean, we know that's not true, though.
I know. And in my classes, I was always arguing that point.
Yeah.
However,
how do we know it? How do we know? We don't know.
Well, they've got their math around it, but they will say, I think neuroscience is really a new field, and it's still, it can be blown wide open at any moment. So, but you know how it is with dealing with doctrines. It's no different.
And Jerry, I say I know that because it survives like the death of the brain. So.
But we don't know that either. I'm playing devil's advocate.
I mean, there are plenty of people who've had experiences otherwise, who've talked to entities that don't have any sort of physical form. I mean, I get where you're coming from. Like, we don't have any way to learn like objective truth about any of this stuff, but I mean, there's no way to have objective truth in general anyway. We just have to go with what evidence we're given.
It just seems like when we're out of this experience, it's all very subjective.
Yeah.
Out of the physical plane. So, I mean, death would be a subjective experience too. Which to me tells me if I expect to go to hell because I'm bad, I'm going to go to someplace pretty much like hell.
Yeah. And, I'm just basing this on, thousands of years of human experience in which people have communicated with entities that claim that they have survived bodily death. So, I mean, that's all I can really go on.
True. And I could explain that as, what if DNA has some etheric component to it that we aren't aware of, that stores the memories of a person? Because think about going back to astrology. If you've got a blank slate person, right? And take chemistry out of this for a minute. Blank slate person that's stamped with this astrological template. And you add in back all the memories and experiences that this person had. Is that not the same person?
Mhm. I mean, that's the grandfather Zach's paradox.
That's the axe. Mm-hmm.
So the question, that part two then, is if this reconstituted being appeared to you in holographic form in a dream or whatever, and spewed stuff that would be part of that record, the personal Akashic record, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
Subjectively, you're going to think that's grandpa, that's my mom, that's, you know,
mm-hmm.
when this might just be a reenactment or a rerun. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's just something to think about.
I mean, I think you're maybe getting at the idea that, like, we always expect us to be like literally the same after we die, like, but we're like that's why I was saying before, like, I believe that we're just a fragment, and it's not like everything you are right now is going to survive death and is going to, like, it may, I don't know what I'm trying to say, like, it may look like grandpa, but it's not really grandpa. It's
right,
just,
right. That's
grandpa
what I'm.
Yeah. Grandpa was just a part of it, you know. His
personality, his quirks, his whatever were part of him, and those don't get stored or kept or whatever. I agree. That's what I think. I think that, you know, your essence that makes you, you know, the drive, your spirit, your energy, that survives. And the personal experiences and memories are things that get stored somewhere else.
You know, I actually had this same exact theory a couple months ago. I was thinking about this and thinking that maybe like your personal memories, right, are actually like a physical component of your body.
Yeah.
And
like
things
DNA.
like that may not survive. But yeah,
DNA,
like some
man.
sort of, yeah. I mean,
the human blockchain. Think about it.
Yeah, totally.
And yeah, that kind of stuff may not survive death. But then how do you explain like near death or past life experiences? Because
I don't believe them.
mean, my idea about them was that they could be psychic in nature rather than an actual memory. Like you're basically remote viewing your own timeline.
That's one thought. It's some kind of remote viewing thing, but some of these people who do like the HQT and other types of regression, like who's that guy? I forget that guy's name, but I don't like him. Do more suggestive work. You know, they put up a they'll build an astral construct for you to inhabit while you go through this procedure. I don't know, Nish, remember when CW was doing that with Hank? Oh,
yes.
Yeah. Hank would, you know, put him into this trance-like state and then build an astral construct of some form and draw the subject in, and he thought he was on Saturn, you know. And that was his past life now. But it was totally constructed by the guy running the therapy.
Yeah, but how do you know he wasn't on Saturn?
I don't.
I mean, he may have put him on Saturn. And that's what I'm saying. Like,
no, he was just sitting in a chair talking about it. I mean, it was all mental. Yeah.
But I guess what I'm saying is, why would it necessarily like be only purely subjective experience? I mean, maybe he was just remote viewing Saturn.
Maybe. Okay, I guess I didn't explain my position about it. I don't think it's good, because I think that a lot of these experiences, these past lives, quote unquote past lives, are suggested or are a result of suggestions or hypnotic suggestions, whatever.
Yeah. I agree with you there. The only way,
unless it comes to you naturally, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a proponent of hypnosis at all, and yeah, if it comes to you naturally, fine. But even then, unless you can corroborate like things with actual information that you can find about this past life, like there's no way you can know it's true or not. Like, I mean, when I was on mescaline once, I had a profound feeling that like I had a past life and I died in the Spanish Civil War. But I mean, I don't know if I did or not. It's fun to believe, maybe
that there's some really compelling evidence for that, though, with these kids that start talking. Oh, you know, I was some guy down the street and this other guy killed me. I heard this. I saw this on the news. It might not be real, but whatever. This kid says, oh, this other dude killed me and I was such and such. And they go and find out that this person he claims he was killed by a man with an axe. And the kid's got a birthmark in the same spot.
Yeah, it's so
And the
fascinating.
murder's been unsolved, and now they're like, oh yeah, he did do it, and they found the axe or something. It was like,
It was
because
like that
this kid
70s movie, Audrey Rose.
I actually read that book. Somebody wrote
That's
it.
exactly what we're talking
Uh,
about.
but on the other hand, what if as a child, like you're just more naturally able to pull in psychic information? What if he was just remote viewing this guy's death? And because a child doesn't have any real separation between like their identity and other people's identities, they just assume that they were that person.
The
And
birthmark in the shape of the wound was the kicker for me.
the birthmark could be stigmata. I mean, it could be psychosomatic.
He's had it since he was born. So he's remote viewing in the womb?
Maybe. We don't know.
I know that for me, my experience, and I'm not telling the story again, but because I've told it enough, Lotta's had it. I came in really with a sense of self and confirmed later that it was, under 6 months. And I don't have a sense of before, but I was stuck in flesh and I knew I was not, I was still me and I felt stuck. And then, so I always wondered like, and I've always had a strong sense of self, not self as in like identifying with my flesh in a deeper, bigger sense. And so that's what's always been such a chink in the armor for some of these arguments with me listening to others speak, because of my experience, and so how does one navigate this territory?
Yeah, I mean, and I'm just being contrarian here. I mean, as I said earlier, obviously believe in past lives and believe that we've all lived multiple lives, but it all comes back to the fact that we can't objectively prove what's going on in any of this. It's something that I think Russell Targ brings up in the appendix to McMonagle's book about RV, specifically talking about associative RV, in that there's no way to know whether or not you're actually pulling in information in the future or you're causing something to happen in the future through the act of RV.
Right.
Like, there's a loop
Yeah.
there, but there's no way of knowing what the chicken and the egg is there.
I think it's obvious if quantum theory is correct, if you look at the observer effect. Regardless, if you're doing remote viewing or local viewing, you're still an observer. So yeah, your energy is there somehow.
Well, I mean, I'm at the point now where I'm thinking basically what's happening is that you're creating stable time, like causal time loops, like stable time loops. Like, because the important thing with, like, for people who aren't familiar, like associative RV is where you're presented with a binary option. Like, should I buy this stock? Yes or no. And the yes is like given some sort of image, like say hamster, and no is given an image of like a fire truck. And then the person is like asked the question, and then they're asked to remote view the answer. They don't know what the yes or no images are. An analyst then like sort of analyzes their results and tries to match it to one of the binary options. Like maybe somebody remote views like some sort of like furry animal. So it's like obviously not the fire truck. So they say yes. Now, in the future, if like when the actual thing happens, like yes or no, the viewer is then shown the image of the thing that actually occurred. So like, let's say the stock went up, and the viewer is then shown the image in the future of the hamster. So what's impossible to know here is that is the viewer like basically precognitively like seeing this thing that they're going to see in the future when the event occurs, or are they causing it to occur through the viewing, like almost like a form of like sigil magic or something like that. But I think what's really going on is that you're creating a stable time loop where like there's no real causality there. Like it's a circle. basically.
So, I'm sorry. Go ahead. Finish up.
No, that's it.
I was just going to say, I'm more now than ever. I strongly feel that CRV is a form of sigil magic. That the target, when created properly, is a sigil that guides the subconscious of the viewer to that location.
Yeah, no, you're totally right. I mean, that's why like, you're not supposed to, like, originally when they did coordinate remote viewing, they called it that because they were using like real coordinates. And then the skeptics came up, in the military, were like, well, maybe these remote viewers are like literally memorizing every single Cartesian coordinate on Earth. Like, like that would be possible. But in order to like cut that down, they just started assigning a random string of like letters and numbers,
right,
and just calling that the coordinate, and it still worked.
Right.
So
because letters are sigils.
Yeah, you're just enciphering the image into a letter and number combination, which is basically a sigil.
And I'm sure, I mean, if I ever do CRV, I'm going to definitely repeat the target out loud. I would say it a bunch of times to get it in there.
But what's important is the feedback element. So like, you have to provide feedback. Okay. So like, in the future, after the experiment is over, the viewer is shown the image of like whatever the target is, right? So they can sort of analyze what happened.
Right.
So, like I said before, it's sort of impossible to know whether or not they're having a precognitive vision of having seen this image in the future versus whether or not they actually remote viewed something.
It depends on how it works.
I mean, that's why, like, I posted something on Twitter the other day where somebody was talking about the CIA, like the remote viewing program, and they called it like astral travel, whatever. And I'm like, there's a very distinct difference between out-of-body experiences and remote viewing. McMonagle says this multiple times. Like, somebody tried to argue with me, and they were like, it's probably working on the same mechanics or whatever. And I'm like, they're two totally different things. McMonagle is very clear on that the experience of RV is very, very different from the experience of having an out-of-body experience. And he's someone who did both quite frequently. He studied Robert Monroe and stuff, so he would know. I tend to think that information, like RV, may all just be precognitive in nature, rather than actual pulling in information from a remote source. And that's something that, we'll just have to do more research to figure out. And that's why
it may not be discoverable.
I mean, it may not. I mean, it may be that that's a question you can't answer because of like causality.
Right.
Now, that's why I am fascinated by veridical OBE experiences, where somebody's able to have an OBE, travel to another place remote to them, and bring back information that they could not have possibly known.
Like something on the dresser.
Yeah, or like listening in on a conversation and being able to repeat the conversation to a person at a later date and have it confirmed, that sort of thing. I've never been able to do that myself. I've always had trouble staying in the real, as it were. I always end up, when I have an OBE, I always end up, drifting off into dreamland and exploring the other worlds.
I wonder if that's a natural mechanism because you're not ready or something. I don't know. Maybe what if you're too, not you specifically, you collective, what if we are too powerful in the real, in our etheric bodies, so we're relegated to dream time or something like that?
It's possible. I mean, I've thought a lot about like one thing that's briefly mentioned in some stuff on RV is like anti-RV techniques, because all the major powers are doing RV and they realized like how dangerous it was, so like they had to come up with anti-RV countermeasures. And I've long kind of thought about like, what if there are anti-OBE countermeasures? I mean, I'm saying
it's been said. I mean, I've heard people describe them that they're all over the place. That the whole fourth dimension, i.e. astral plane, is on lockdown. But
Yeah, hence the free thing earlier.
mhm.
Yeah. I mean, if spirits can be trapped in a triangle of art, is it possible for somebody in an out-of-body state to be similarly bound?
I keep wondering this. That's like one of my biggest ponders. Sometimes I feel like I'm a prolific dreamer, and OBs I have had a scattered amount of, but it's not like the common thing. And they all are, I have felt like I've been trapped a couple times, like a genie,
Mm-hmm.
like summoned,
You know,
like a spirit.
I just thought of something crazy that relates to that. So go ahead. Go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Well, no, I mean, carry on. But that is something I was just thinking. I was talking to Reverend Eric, the other day, and it was. I think that this is where this whole thing came up for me. Was maybe my experiences somehow when I'm OBE, but for me, I get overwhelmed with the out of body experience too. Sometimes when I get when I think too much into it, I don't even know how to describe that. When I'm like, whoa, I'm by local right now. I'm out of my body.
You engage your left brain.
I totally, and it always sends the experience. But I was thinking about being conjured. Like I felt like there are a couple experiences where I felt like I had been like conjured as a spirit to some ceremonies, and had a limited experience there. Like I couldn't move around much and all that. So, Jerry, you were going to say?
Well, a couple things. You could have the spirit of something powerful that's reincarnated. That's just one idea.
Wouldn't that be grand?
Like a goddess. I mean, it's probably true. The other thing I was thinking, the thing that like just slapped me in the face was this. Back when I was a youngling, right about the time I became post-Muggle, I found this website called creepyhollows.com, and they sell spirited items, jewelry, stones, whatnot, that they allegedly attach spirits to. And one of the sections on their website, and this is the one that always struck me as odd, was living spirits. And they claim to have these objects that they've made contracts with living spirits, spirits of living individuals on this planet that have allowed to be bound to these items. And a binding is nothing more than an energetic frequency beacon for the spirit or entity to find its way back to you if you need it. Mm-hmm. Think of it as a rope, but not a collar, not a leash. So that's what I was thinking of. What if your spirit, maybe in a parallel life or whatever, has contractually bound to one of these types of individuals or things, objects?
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm just now, it's just right now in my consciousness about pondering like those couple experiences where I felt that like I was, and I can imagine that if I was someone else and this was a new experience, it would have felt like an abduction. I just want you to know, because you're pulled out. I'm pulled out. So sleep paralysis.
Oh, that's fucking interesting.
And I'm having a good experience of lucidity, which a lot of people equate with out of body, but there's a difference. And I have lots of lucid dreams. My main dreamscape is lucidity and high lucidity. But then all of a sudden I'm like pulled out. So there's this whole different experience. And if I didn't have the other experiences at hand, I would think that was part of the OBE. And then I'm in these environments, or this environment that is very girl under glass bubble, kind of experience. Like I don't have a lot of parameter to work with, and I can't really tell what I'm dealing with because everything's shadowy. And so that's why I've been pondering this through magic lately.
Well, I was telling you about the Jovian traveling to Jupiter experience a little while ago.
Mm-hmm.
Something similar happened to me like during that experience, in which like I was like sitting there standing there floating there observing the majesty of Jupiter, when all of a sudden I felt like somebody grabbed the back of my collar and just like yanked me like back. And I remember like I started flying
shit.
backwards at like really fast speed, and like I saw moons and stuff fly past me and stars fly past me. And then like everything went black, and then I was like in another place. It looked like kind of like a daycare, like very colorful walls, like some shelves with like books, and there were kind of other people like milling about in there.
Oh, interesting.
And I was like, where the hell am I? And
did you get answers?
Yeah, sort of. I was like, well, screw this, like I don't want to be here. So like I headed for the wall. Like I was just gonna fly to the wall and continue traveling, except I hit the wall, and I touched the wall, and it was like I couldn't go through it. I was like, oh hell, like I was like trapped. And
right.
I was like, and so I was like looking around, and I saw one particular person, and I immediately knew, like intuitively, that they were the reason why I was there. Like it was like this little kid sitting on like this couch. He had like his arms crossed, and he was like looking at me. He had like kind of wearing clothes that were a little too big for him, like a little jacket and like a hat where I couldn't see his eyes, but I could see this like huge, like slasher grin on his face. And he was just like smiling at me. And I immediately knew like he was the one who like grabbed me and pulled me here. And I didn't know why I was there, but I immediately just like zoomed up to him and just yelled like with like a bunch of different voices at once, which is like a weird sensation. But I was like, let me out. Like, I don't want to be here. And he wouldn't say anything back to me. He just kept smiling. And I looked down at the table, and there was like a gun on the table. I don't know if I made this gun appear or if it was already there or what, but I just like immediately picked it up and without hesitation, like put it on one of his legs and just like pulled the trigger into his thigh. And like it went off, and like blood shot out of his thigh. He just starts like screaming, like, oh, like in pain, like, like this affected him. And I put it to his other like thigh, and I was like, I'm going to blow out your other knee if you don't let me out now. And he didn't have the grin now. Like he looked really scared. And then I was out. I actually woke up in bed. And
you amaze me, Wren. You amaze me.
I'm not going to take shit from these things,
Oh man, that's awesome. That is seriously awesome.
So he wasn't quite done yet. So I'm laying in bed. I just woke up from out of body experience. I start to go back to sleep and immediately fall back into sleep paralysis. So I'm like, okay, well, I guess let's have another out of body experience. So I like roll out of my body and I walk down the hallway to my living room. But by the time I make it to the living room, it's like a different house. Like it's got these huge, like kind of like bay windows looking out into the street outside. It's like some kind of big mansion like house. And I look outside, and like it's like kind of one of those neighborhoods where there's like it's like a two-way street separated in the middle by like a partition with like trees and stuff in it. And I see the same kid, and he's like standing out there with a couple other people, and he looks up and sees me in the window, and he just looks like terrified. And I'm like, I just knew that he was like, he brought me here too. Like he somehow grabbed me and pulled me to this place too. So I just like smash the window and just like go for his throat, and he starts running away and like manages to like slip away. I don't know where he went, but he just like disappeared and like ran off. And then I floated around for a bit in whatever this place was and woke up again in bed.
I wonder what, I'm so curious, like it totally feels like you were conjured. I mean, he was obviously able to pull you from your experience into his. But the description of him, which could just be symbolic, is youthful, right? Playing around and being youthful, is counter that unless we look at it symbolically. And yeah, that's interesting. And then it's like he wanted to show his friends that he could do that. And here's Big Bad Wren.
Yeah. I got the impression he wasn't human. So like whatever place I got pulled to, I don't think was like in reality.
Okay. Gotcha. Yeah, I didn't. I'm just going from the imagery you gave me, which was human.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. No, he looked human, and the places that I was pulled into both times were like places that looked like they could exist on Earth. They weren't dreamlike. But I got the impression that they weren't, reality. That it was like some other area of the dream world that like I got pulled to.
Yeah, but there's also, and so they were fucking with you though, clearly.
Yeah, he was obviously that's what I think is interesting too, that there were other people in that daycare place, like milling around as well. I wonder if they were other people that he pulled there. Like maybe he was like creating a collection or something. Because
Right.
all the other people were just wandering around like zombies. But I immediately knew that something was wrong.
Okay, I want to touch on that. So in some of my OBs, oh, I hear a big old crash in the house. Did you hear that?
I heard that, yeah.
I did.
Oh my God, I wonder what that was.
Pat or me?
Oh, wow. Anyway, so in one thing I have noticed, and I've talked about this a lot in the past, but I have not since we've been doing Nox Mente, is I've definitely encountered people in OBE experience that totally seem zombified, and I'm just wondering, are these just people dreaming? Are they? It doesn't perplex me enough when I'm encountering them. I just move on because they're boring, right? But what do you think's going on there?
I think you're probably on the money. I think there are other people who are just dreaming. They're probably just like we are when we have dreams that aren't lucid.
Yeah.
We probably appear exactly the same way, just going about like we're like actors in a play at that point, like not consciously aware of what we're doing, but just kind of going along with whatever's being presented to us, like living in whatever fiction.
Could that be because we're running the avatars in another life, or we're backseating, if you will? We're in the backseat of our other lives.
Possible. That's a neat idea, though.
Yeah.
Hey, Jared, did anyone ever have questions for Wren when we back in the moment?
Well, when you had to go, I was asking them.
Oh, okay. I didn't know. I did not know.
Well, that's very cool. So, Wren, do you want to push on your stuff?
Yeah. So, I keep a not frequently updated blog at liminalroom.com, and I'm mostly active on Twitter. I'm at Mr. _ Apol, APOL on Twitter. Generally, I talk a lot there about occult stuff, cryptocurrency, whatever. I'm also kind of like frequently a roundtable guest on Where Did the Road Go? It's a good show, and
it is a good show.
And yeah, I mean, people can feel free to follow me on Twitter, or if they have any questions, hit me up in the DMs or whatever. My DMs are open as far as I know, so if people want to ask questions, yeah, I'm always available.
What about your anarcho comedy, crypto comedy?
I would, yeah. So I wrote a magical primer for like people completely unfamiliar with the occult or magic or anything, called Liber Anarchia for Street Fight Magazine, which is a podcast. It's a zine for an anarcho comedy podcast, and I would push that, but I think unfortunately it's not in print anymore. I think it was a pretty limited run zine, so I don't think they're any more available. So I'm going to be talking with the guys and say if they're not going to print anymore, if I can just reproduce it on my website. And if I do so, I'll let everyone know on Twitter so they can go read it.
I have my copy right here.
Yeah. It's pretty basic stuff. I mean, it's stuff that people probably, if they're familiar with the occult, probably already know. But if you're completely unfamiliar with the occult or don't know where to start or want to learn how to do sigil magic, I think it's my bumbling attempt at making a pop magic for the 2000s.
Cool. All right, I'll find a link for the Street Fighter and put it in the description.
Yeah, everyone listen to the Street Fight Radio. It's a great podcast.
I muted Nish. Nish, are you back?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thanks so much, Wren, for joining us. Thanks for hanging around and talking.
And this was wonderful.
I kind of like this extended thing.
Yeah, this was great. This might be a success for the future.
It would save me from having to edit all that shit.
I know. Jerry's backlog. Hey, Wren, I want to join that. So, and I meant to reach out to you. It's ironic, or not ironic, synchronistic that you were on tonight just after Suzanne told me about the remote viewing thing.
Yeah. Yeah, you're in the Charismatic Discord, right?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, so I'll just I'll hit you up with a DM and I'll give you a link to the consent form. It's probably seems a lot more formal than it really is, but it's mainly because I'm trying to run like an actual academic study, and I think things like informed consent are important. So.
Oh yeah, I'm down
Absolutely.
with it. So
yeah.
Well, thanks everyone for watching, and thanks for listening if you're listening in later. Thank you, Wren, for joining us. Thank you, Nish. Next week we have Vince Yanunza. Is that how you pronounce it? Anyone?
Wren?
Inzunza.
Benzunza.
At least that's how I say it. I don't know.
Pacific North Weird. They have a really cool channel. I've got the links in the description of that video. And in 2 weeks, Heidi Vandenberg's coming up with Jenny Moonstone and then Gordon White. So we have an exciting March and April lined up. And we hope you'll all stick around to join us. So
Thank you, everyone.
Take care.
Thanks, everyone.